This week, Lennart Koopman, the CTO of Graylog, joins us for an interview about Enzyme, a free and open Wi-Fi defense system. Then Dutch Swartz, Principal Security Specialist at Amazon Web Services, joins us for a discussion on the lessons learned when migrating from on-prem to cloud. In the security news, Polish blogger sued after revealing security issue in encrypted messenger. The Facebook dump and Have I Been Pwned? Child tweets gibberish from a highly sensitive Twitter account. LinkedIn and more eggs. APT is targeting Fortinet. SAP applications are under attack again. Is your dishwasher trying to kill you? Ubiquiti all but confirms breach response inequity. Cyber threat analysis, 11 useful security tips for AWS, and other stuff too. Signal adds cryptocurrency support. Not everyone's a fan. Zoom zero-click exploit when firmware attacks, attackers blowing up Discord, all that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. Cybercriminals are using social engineering, loaded with urgency and fear, to successfully prey on victims, your employees, or your customers. Protect your Office 365 email from today's most sophisticated attacks with Barracuda Email Threat Scanner. It's a free tool to help protect your business from these hard-to-detect attacks. The Barracuda Email Threat Scanner uses artificial intelligence to hunt and eliminate Office 365 email threats. Find the cybersecurity threats hiding in your Office 365 email right now. Get your free email threat scan at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. PlexTrack is the platform that helps cybersecurity practitioners get the daily work done. Red teams can create reports in half the time and track risk to resolution with the blue team. Teams can centralize remediation efforts across all scans, assessments, and audits. Effectively communicate risk in real time through simple visualizations, scanner and ticketing integrations, and robust analytics. PlexTrack is perfect for collaboration across all teams. Visit securityweekly.com/PlexTrack to claim your free month.
And welcome to the show. Now, after that introduction, I kind of wonder what the more part is, but oh wait, the more part is Mr. Paul Asadoorian.
Welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 690, being recorded on April 8th, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Let's see, Larry Pesce is here with us remotely. Larry, welcome.
Thank you. Yep, we made the decision last minute to go remote, but hey, here we are, and we're used to this by now. We've been doing this for a year, right?
Right, exactly. Also, all the hosts are other than myself, are remote. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Yeah, good to be here. Good to figure out how the mute button works. I misfired it a couple times earlier, but we are dialed in and ready to rock.
If we only had $1 for every time in the past year someone had issues with the mute button. Wow. Mr. Jeff Mann.
I'd have $2.
Right? Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us. Jeff, welcome.
I am 41 days away from becoming eligible to come to G-Unit Studios.
41 days. Wow. I can't wait. I'll be counting down the minutes.
My second vaccine will be on Cinco de Mayo, and then 2 weeks after that, I'm good to go.
Sweet. Can't wait. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us. Tyler, welcome.
Man, we're going to have to work out that timing. I want to be there for that big, awkward Jeff hug.
I know, right? It's going to be interesting. Yeah. Everyone's just going to convert. No one's going to want to leave. Be coming into the office for everything. Oh, you guys are still here.
Pretty much.
Grab some sleeping bags. We'll just camp out.
That's it. Going to be a lot of fun. Our next live webcast will be held on April 29th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, where you'll learn how to prepare for and prevent modern ransomware attacks. That's right, myself, Adrian Sanabria, and Jake Williams will be presenting that, sponsored by Cisco Umbrella. Our next technical training will be May 6th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. We will explore common misconfigurations of Nginx with our fine friends at Detectify, the damage they could do and how to avoid them. That's Nginx, not Detectify. They don't do damage. They do good stuff. Glad to have that training in there. SecurityWeekly.com/webcast. Register now. If you missed it, SecurityWeekly.com/IRC. on demand, get you access to the entire archive. Leonard Koopman is the CTO of Graylog, founded Graylog as an open source project in 2009, and joins us today to talk about Enzyme, his free Wi-Fi IDS project. Welcome, Leonard. How are you?
Hey, how's it going? I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Leonard, I guess in customary Security Weekly fashion, I'm going to ask you how you got your start in information security.
It's actually interesting. I think I got into it through Graylog actually. So Graylog was my open source project, very much like Enzyme today, except I knew much less about how to build software back then. But it started in 2009, and it was mostly for DevOps teams, for developers, for IT ops people, and then honestly, more and more security people started to use it. So that's when I was introduced to the community, and since then I've learned more and more, and I think that's really how I got started. It's a great community with a lot of people to learn from,
Leonard, describe for our audience what Graylog is.
Yeah, so Graylog is a free and open log management system. It's running on-premise. There's now recently a cloud version launched, but it has been on-premise for the longest time. It, of course, is still available on-premise. You get it on GitHub. It's open source, and you send it all your logs. Could be logs from your cloud systems, could be logs from your firewalls, from your operating systems, really anything that interests you. And like I said, I think it's an interesting tool for developers, for operations, for compliance. And then one of our biggest use cases is security. Some people use it as a SIM. Some people use it more for forensics and incident response. I think there are very many different ways to use it, but it's an open source log management tool.
Leonard, some people asked me, one person asked me an interesting question today after I gave a presentation, and they were talking about the kind of relationship that you have with the folks in the community, technology or security, when you have an open source project in terms of contributions back. And, my answer was some people agreed, haven't had the best experience and have either taken it closed source or abandoned projects for a number of reasons. Not getting people participating is one. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I think you gotta decide for the strategy for your product, and if a company forms behind it, which is what happened for Graylog. I think you got to decide how you kind of want to leverage the open source community. I think that the open source community provides a lot of value for the community itself. It is there's a lot of guides out there. There are great blog posts about how you can use Graylog processing pipelines to detect threats, for example. Way more than we could ever do, and I think especially for some systems that only have a smaller community out there. Like I'm always thinking about. There are people who are sending logs from their mainframe systems into Graylog. We would probably not provide a lot of content for that out of the box, but the security community, the community around Graylog is actually going to go in and is going to provide a lot of that. And I think that's something that is with the openness of a open source product, where the APIs are open, where you can develop additional codes, where there are a lot of APIs simply available. It is something where the community can provide a lot of things that go directly back to the community. For Graylog in our case, we've always had people who also develop code, who develop Graylog itself. And the cool thing is, a lot of them ended up working for Graylog. So a lot of the very early community members are some of the longest time employees today in Graylog as a company, which is really, of course, great to see.
That's awesome. So it sounds like there's still a lot of community involvement in giving back to the project.
Absolutely, and we want that. We love that, we give back to the community too. So Graylog has been a sponsor of the Blue Team Village at DEF CON, for example, for a very long time. And it's just great to be there and have these people who never bought anything from us and probably never will buy anything from us, and it's completely fine. Who will drop by and just have some questions or show us something that they built, And I think that's an awesome thing about open source, and I think a lot of kind of decisions in the product that make the product more attractive to the user in the end are driven by an open source community and by having 40,000, 50,000 deployments out there that are hammering the systems with their use cases and that have certain demands and certain ideas on how it should be used. It almost forces you to make really good decisions and things that are in the interest of the user. And I think that in the end is in the interest of everyone.
Tyler?
So curious, what from a technical and ingestion standpoint, what are the formats you guys are ingesting? You taking in all the router switch traffic? You taking in Sysmon, event viewer data? What kind of format is the ingestion engine able to handle?
I always like to say pretty much anything that Greylock can blend into a text and a timestamp. We've had this mainframe example. There was this grocery company somewhere in Indiana. They had this old IBM mainframe in the basement, and we managed to get those logs into Greylock too. So it's a very flexible system in the end. It comes pre-built for a lot of the common formats. So if you have Sysmon, you run a WinLogBeat, for example, then you can very easily send that data into Greylock, and Greylock's just going to parse it out of the box. If you have something that we might not recognize, we'll simply read the text that you send us over a socket. And then you can apply parsing rules, you can apply pipelines, do enrichment, do all of that stuff. It's simply a little more manual work, but I cannot remember a case where a log format couldn't be processed by Greylock in the end.
So as part of that enrichment, does that also include the ability to be able to build dashboards and alerting outside of just parsing the data?
Yeah, it comes with the full web interface that allows you to build reports, allows you to put alerts on top of it, dashboards, views, saved searches, kind of all the good stuff that I think you're used to from other non-open log management tools that are out there. Yeah.
So what are the differentiations between, say, something like an Elk Stack or a Splunk instance? What kind of benefits do you see? Obviously, open source is amazing. That's considering how much Splunk costs from a data ingestion side as you start to exponentially grow that. What other benefits does Graylog have, and what kind of comparison does it have to something like Splunk?
Yeah, absolutely. I think compared to the Elastic Stack, which is another fantastic open source solution out there, I think one of the big benefits is that Greylock has been built for logs. I think Elastic is great to look at any kind of data out there, but it also means that you have to make it work for logs. There's a lot of manual work, a lot of kind of wrangling with the system to make it work effectively for logs, both from a maintenance perspective as well as I think a kind of just daily use perspective of it from an analyst perspective. From Splunk, I mean, obviously there's the cost factor. I think that's the first thing everyone thinks about. But the moment I think you use the Greylock search interface, you're gonna discover a lot of nuances that we hear people who've used both say that they really like about Greylock, that they feel much closer to the data. So especially when you do something like threat hunting, when you do something where you might just go in, you don't even know yet what you're looking for. The Greylock interface has been built to discover and answer questions in a very iterative way, instead of feeling like, okay, this is more like a database query that gets very complex, that will give me precisely the answer that I want, but I sometimes feel like I already need to know what specifically I'm looking for. It's hard to describe without showing it, but in Greylock, it's more of a, hey, let me look in this direction, let me look in that direction, and all is just very snappy, comes back really fast, and allows you to pivot across the data in very many different, extremely fast ways. And I think that's one of the things that people really like about it. And then there's the openness, there's the huge community. I mean, there's a lot of things I think that differentiate it besides just the price.
Leonard, at some point you decided to look into Wi-Fi security. What made you look in that direction? I mean, it's not as hot of a topic as it was, 10 plus years ago, right?
That's absolutely true. I think I kind of made my way there through. I was playing around with SDR, or software defined radio. I've always been, I think, very fascinated by wireless technologies. Just this idea that with a few milliwatts, I can sit here and just generate a signal that someone else far away might be able to receive and decode the information. And I think that's something that has always been very fascinating to me. So I've been playing around with software-defined radio, and I think you're only one step away from something like the Wi-Fi Kinect, and then that makes you interested in, hey, this is all really, really insecure. Like I kind of feel bad about my Wi-Fi at home. Like this has not been designed with a lot of security in mind, and it seems like it's really, really easy, even for people without a lot of effort, to attack a wireless network. And so that's when I started playing around with it. And I think the next thing that everybody does is just get a Wi-Fi interface, a Wi-Fi card that supports monitor mode, and just look at Wireshark and just see what's in the air, now, me having been a software developer for the longest time in my life, I feel, of course, the next idea for me was I should be able to parse these. I should be able to do some stuff with it. So I was just playing around with it, and I have been looking at that time. I have been looking for a fun side project, because for Greylock now, I'm the CTO at Greylock. We're at a size where the CTO of Greylock does no longer write code for good reason. But I wanted something where I could still write code on the weekends, over Christmas, after work, because I like writing code. And I think it's very important once you become a manager to not get into a mood where you kind of romanticize your old days of writing code, where you only remember the good things, but never the annoying bug that you thought takes 5 minutes to fix and actually took the whole day to fix. So to kind of keep the reality of writing code in mind, so I can be a better manager for our employees. I said I want to have a side project. It will not be for the foreseeable future. It won't be as serious as Greylock, because all my work goes into Greylock. But it just seemed to fit. I was looking for something to write that has a purpose that other people might want to use, and I was playing around with Wi-Fi. So these two things came together, and I thought, hey, I guess I can detect some things. So I was just playing around with it. I guess that's what happened.
So Paul, if I may, so
please
Leonard,
do that.
I teach the SANS wireless course. I'm one of the co-authors. I think in recent memory that there's been those red letter dates in history, like when the big Wi-Fi thing happened that was amazing for our course. One of them was Crack, because that was all of a sudden there was this huge renewed interest. And for me was Enzyme, because there's really no good or change my mind. There was no really good open source wireless IDS monitoring solution that could do what Enzyme can.
Yeah. No, Larry and Leonard, if you could explain the differences between Enzyme and Kismet to me, that would be fabulous, right?
Yeah. Should I start, and then you can add whatever you have in mind to it. I think the difference between Enzyme and Kismet is another fantastic open source tool out there. I'm actually linking to Kismet on the Enzyme website, and say like, hey, this is what Enzyme does. This is what Kismet does. If you've got to decide what you want to do, and here's the Kismet website. It's awesome, great tool, huge community, great people behind it. I think the difference is that from my perspective, Kismet is more on a reconnaissance, maybe war driving. Maybe I've heard about some red team use cases for it. If I should describe it in one sentence, I would say Enzyme is designed to be deployed in a grid of sensors that never move, but completely monitor everything that's in range, and that put all of the code and all of the intelligence into trying to detect adversaries, and leaves you alone if nothing's going on and everything's all right. What it basically does is it is moving, I think, one step further from the existing signature-based approaches, where you would say, hey, here are all my access points. These are the BSS IDs, or you could describe it as a MAC address of these access points. And whenever you see a different access point advertising my network with a different MAC address, that means someone spun up a rogue access point, and then please alert me. The problem with Wi-Fi is that these things are so easy to spoof that I believe even everyone who's just trying a little bit will probably very easily spoof these things. So what I did after I kind of figured out how to record these packets, how to process them, how to get intelligence out of them, I was thinking about, if I was an attacker, if I was walking around with a Wi-Fi Pineapple, with some sort of attack platform, what would I have a really hard time spoofing? And the first thing that came to my mind was you would on kind of a waterfall chart of signal strength, you would most likely create a second signal track somewhere, because you have this access point, which is probably, let's say 15 feet away from your Enzyme sensor, and has a certain signal strength. It's always going to be in that kind of waterfall, almost like in a submarine movie, where you get the sonar signal and you get this track of it. If someone sits in a parking lot with a Wi-Fi Pineapple, that's going to be a different signature on that. So I put some rules and some analysis and some statistical analysis in place that will kind of create a box To be honest, I was watching Hunt for Red October, and that inspired me a little for the face. But one thing only. It actually draws a box around every signal track that it sees. And if the moment there are more than one signal tracks, that means that there's something that attempts to spoof your legitimate hardware. And it doesn't matter what the metadata is in it. It only looks at the signal strength in that case. It can also look at the metadata. It can create fingerprints. It can do a ton of stuff. But I try to focus on, okay, after these very signature-based, easy to spoof things, what do you have a hard time spoofing as an attacker? And that's I think what these new set of alerts are really trying to focus on.
Now, can this sit alongside of a lot of the kind of advanced monitoring that some of the, we'll say, higher-end commercial gear is starting to move to, or even consumer gear, where they do have an additional radio that's monitoring for access points of the same name? This can run in conjunction with that, correct?
100%. The whole thing is designed to be cheap and easy to deploy. You don't need any special hardware. You need actually got one. It's in a cable. I can't show it, but you need a Wi-Fi adapter that supports monitor mode on your Linux, which, because of Kali Linux and all the others, there are very comprehensive lists of everything that works. It's basically all the alpha cards you find on Amazon. They're going to support it. Monitor mode, for those who don't know what it is, it's like a promiscuous mode of your Ethernet card, where it will record anything that comes in, and you just tell it, send me all the packets that are on this, all the frames that are on this frequency right now. And monitor frames and Wi-Fi are not encrypted, so you can actually record all of them. So you need one of those cards. It's just USB. I think they start at probably $20-$30. You connect it to a Raspberry Pi. I started developing it on a Raspberry 3. And I'm now running it on a Raspberry 4, and it's like, I think 10% load or something. So it's you can build the whole setup for probably, Amazon Prime, you're going to deliver tomorrow. It's going to cost you maybe $40 to $50, even with the case for the Raspberry Pi. That's what it was designed to do. It's supposed to run on commodity hardware that you might have laying around right now. You just download it and run it.
I do have said hardware laying around.
Have you had any luck doing monitor mode on the built-in Broadcom chipset for the Raspberry Pi? I know there's some patches out there and that type of stuff, but for me the USB is a heck of a lot easier to do. But have you tried with the built-in Broadcom?
I did on the Raspberry Pi 3. I actually have a to-do to try it on the new 4. I believe the driver for that is called Nexmon or something like that.
Yeah, Nexmon.
They even work on the Raspberry Pi Zero. They designed those drivers to replace the kernel module for it, basically, and it's gonna it will allow you to put it in monitor mode. I tried that on the 3; it worked fantastically well. So I guess it will work on the. I wouldn't know why it wouldn't work on the 4. It seems to be really solid, really good software. Yeah, and that's open source too, and you just download it.
Yep. So Leonard, can you tell? You talked about the sort of the rogue access point, the evil twin, as it were. What are some of the other detections that you can do sort of now, and if we were looking as someone who wants to contribute to an open source project, how would we add new detection methods?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, I think it's great. Two great questions. So the first one, what else does it do besides the signal tracks? Another thing it does is, for example, it builds fingerprints. Another thing that is hard to prove in Wi-Fi frames is there's a certain. So you kind of, from user space, you can change a lot of the metadata of a Wi-Fi frame, like a MAC address, a SSIDs or network name, channel supported channel modes, things like that are often very dynamic. But there's a second set of parameters in those frames, which you can actually see in Wireshark. And those are usually not changed. And those are actually sometimes pretty hard to change, because your Wi-Fi hardware might in fact insist on setting them for certain things. So it either stays in its regulatory bounds, so it doesn't violate FCC rules, or so it can actually in fact send it properly. So there are some things that usually don't change. I'm looking at all these parameters and I'm basically building a checksum over them. This idea is coming from this horrible idea of, I think, some shopping malls and other places deployed these sensors to try to track you and your phone to find out how you move through a mall. Then Apple and Android and all the others came out and they started to randomize their MAC addresses. And then they said, no, we can still fingerprint. So there are some papers about how they do that, and I looked at that, and I tried to run this fingerprinting, and I changed it up a little to make it as reliable as possible. And basically, it turns out that every Wi-Fi pineapple in the world has a specific fingerprint. Every of these little ESP author things, like I actually got one here. This little thing here with this little antenna on top is it's just gonna try to jam your whole Wi-Fi environment by de-authenticating everyone from it. That thing is using a specific fingerprint. The access point that you use to connect to your Wi-Fi pineapple has a specific fingerprint, and even the free Wi-Fi thing that it can advertise has a specific fingerprint. So I started to collect all of these, and I put them in Enzyme, and it can detect them. And the moment you turn on a Wi-Fi pineapple, you only turn it on. You don't even start Pine AP or anything else as part of an attack. The moment you turn it on, and it has either its public access point or its management access point enabled, or it starts sending its attack frames, Enzyme is immediately going to detect it, and it's even going to tell you that this is a Pineapple Nano with firmware version 2.02. Or it can tell you this is a Ponagotchi, which is another platform out there. And it can even tell you its ID because the Ponagotchi decided to broadcast that everywhere for gamification. So that's a lot of additional kind of very attack platform specific detection. And from my experience from Graylog, I knew that if you hard code this, so if you don't let the user influence this, they will always be limited to what I build into it, right? And me knowing that this is my free time thing, there's for sure more platforms out there you want to detect. I built this whole thing in a way where in the web interface, you can click these together and you can say, I am looking for this very specific Wi-Fi pineapple and alert me whenever this thing comes back up. Or you have found a rogue access point and it only pops up sometime during the day. Send me an alert when it's back. And on top of that, and we can talk about that in another question if you want, but on top of that, you can even use a tracker device, which is communicating with Enzyme to physically locate that thing. Because I built another piece of software that communicates with Enzyme that gives you a little interface on your phone or a little display that you can connect to your Raspberry Pi. That's try to kind of hone in on whatever we call it the bandit. So whatever kind of rogue device you define and you described in Enzyme. And you can go and you can use a directional antenna if you have one. You can also use a normal one. And you can literally kind of go around and try to find it. And it's going to show you if you're moving towards it or if you're moving away from it. So this way, you might even be able to physically locate a attack platform in someone's backpack, in a car, in the parking lot. So that's another thing that that Enzyme can do.
Leonard, I just want to point out that the randomizing your MAC address, like on your Android phone, that when I saw that feature and had to disable it because it got in my way of actually configuring a legitimate IoT device, I was like, I kind of really hate that feature. Like, I understand why, but I hate that feature. It's awful. Yeah. It breaks.
And
so
they're
much
still
stuff.
Tracking you. So
and they're still tracking me. Yeah. So I just always turn it off because it gets in the way. It makes stuff break.
Yeah. Yeah.
Curious from an attacker's standpoint, is there ways around this detection that you found so far? Has anybody poked holes in this?
This is so. The second question was, what can the open source community do here to help? I think that would be one of my answers. I would love to see how people evade it. I would in fact love for someone to deploy this and then maybe have a red team friend try to get around it. I would love to see that. I mean, I think we're all hackers at heart. And the idea for Enzyme is not to make the Wi-Fi pineapple worthless. I think it is to up everyone's game in the end, and I think there's a lot of game to up on the Wi-Fi defense side. But I would love for people to just try and see what happens. I would love to hear their experiences, and would love to hear some smart people see how they think they could get around it. That would be awesome. Everything else, I mean, I'm happy about. There's certainly some bugs in there that I would love for people to fix. There are roadmap items. So on the code, if anybody wants to write that, I'll be happy to reach out first, so we can talk about it first, so that work doesn't go to waste. Or documentation, if documentation is unclear. I've had the first person just reach out. They wanted to build free BSD packages. I mean, I'm happy about any contributions. It's an open source project. Let's make it a cool thing.
That's awesome. So yeah, Leonard. So I can think of a number of ways in which I'd want to use it that maybe you haven't already implemented for some of the detection methods. Like I think I can think about some of the denial of service type of attacks that are, maybe ones that we're not as familiar with. Everybody's heard of the deauth and disassociate.
Yeah.
Specifically, one that I think of that is pretty valuable to me, and potentially moving into WPA3 networks when they start seeing a lot more exposure, is what's known as the RTS-CTS co-opting attack. Specifically, some things that we can look for here is the duration field in the header. So we've got our protocol, our type, and our subtype, and then the frame control fields. Immediately after the frame control field is the duration, which is multi-use. Using that multi-use field of a value of 32,767 for RTS CTS packets is like virtually unheard of, and can be used for denial of service. So seeing values over a specific range in that might be indicative of a very unusual denial of service type of attack. So those are some of the things I think about extending it for.
That would be awesome. And if someone out there has these ideas but doesn't feel like writing the code for it, I would love to hear them. For me, a big part of this is to simply learn, right? I would love to just understand what the attack is, try to reproduce it, and think about how Enzyme can detect it. So send me an email. I would love that. That's really what I'm aiming for. Yeah.
So
yeah. So Lee, before you get to this, Leonard, I think you've made instant friends with just about everyone at the Security Weekly production, between sending in your headshot with the cat, and talking nerdery about Wi-Fi and Graylog. I think you've made some instant friends here.
I love it.
So Larry's question reminded me of something back when I was taking 617 from him. One of the challenges was being able to monitor all the different Wi-Fi modes and standards that are out. Like he mentions WPA3. How challenging is it for you to get like a WPA3, or make sure we can not only get 2.4 but 5 gig? I mean, is that now a no-brainer, or is still a challenge to stay up?
So I think from purely a technical perspective, I'm kind of standing on the shoulder of giants there, because I use libpcap, which is basically what TCP dump uses under the hood. And they put the work in of actually parsing these things, so I get the information of what's in the Wi-Fi frames. And they support WPA3, so I don't have to go in and write firmware code for the Wi-Fi adapters, or I don't have to go in and write like some deep C code to just take a byte array and try to figure out what's going on in that data that was received. I'm still dealing with a whole bunch of byte arrays, certainly in Enzyme, because there's still a lot of stuff you got to parse out yourself manually. But luckily, the 802.11 Wi-Fi standard is pretty well documented. It's almost too well documented because you have a hard time finding anything in that huge document, but it's all there. So from that perspective, I should be able to. That sounds like, I think I had the first person who said that Enzyme does not currently detect their specific WPA3 encryption type, which is a new one that Enzyme simply doesn't know about. So it sets it to unknown or NA or something like that. That sounds like something that's probably like a Sunday afternoon work, and then it supports it. I think the more challenging part is for me to actually learn more about WPA3, because the packets are the packets, what they do, what they mean, and how they can be exploited. I think that's really where what will take some time to understand, and that's why I would love to have people tell me their experiences from the community. And also, like I said, that's part of the reason for this project, right? To not get rusty and become a CTO with Excel for the rest of my life, but nerd out about some WPA3 attack methods on the weekend too. Mm-hmm. So that's the two things. There's technical, and then also just understanding the protocol part of it.
Leonard, just backing up to a more high-level architecture. So with Enzyme, can I have multiple sensors spread throughout my facility, and then have like my web management interface in a central location? Like, is it distributed like that?
So not yet. That is the next big thing on the roadmap. What I want to be able to get to is that you can basically form this net of enzyme sensors, and you're going to get this web interface that right now is only basically one node, and every node would have its own web interface, and they don't know about each other. I want to get this in this federated mesh kind of net where I think we could even get smart about how they exchange data and kind of make this all, keep it easy to deploy. Just throw a bunch of Raspberry Pis in the corners and just leave them there. What I want to get to is that these then, when they detect a bandit, when they detect an adversary, that you can see on a map of your campus, your office, your home, wherever you are. You can place where these sensors are, and you can, I think we talked about Ubiquiti in the beginning. They have this really nice interface where you see where your access points are and the signal strength with the walls in between and everything. Something like that, but you will be able to see which sensor is detecting something with what signal strength. And I think then we're only one step away from really triangulating this.
Right.
And I want to see how good that really works, because I think that Wi-Fi signals in buildings with glass and walls and everything could be, I don't know yet how accurate it's going to be, but in a perfect world, we'll end up with a live update of a position of a adversary, something you're tracking in the web interface, because you simply got at least 3 reference points from which you can then at least maybe kind of roughly find out in which direction this person or this device might be, and then from there we can go crazy. We can report these. We can build tracks in history. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that can be done. I released this version 1.0 because I wanted to get it out of the door, so I get feedback. I think the next versions are actually are going to be much bigger and way more interesting.
Yeah, the client server architecture certainly is a lot more to code and design and build, but super useful. I'm even thinking security wise too. I want to know when certain clients, whether they connect to my Wi-Fi network or not, I want to know when they're in range and they come and go. I mean, that's a really cool feature.
You could define them as a bandit, and you would get an alert the moment this thing sends a single frame that's recorded by Enzyme. You could put an alert on it, and I think probably not this release, but the following release is going to have triggers. Right now, it can send emails when that happens, and it's going to show you an alert in the web interface. Why not execute a local script so you can decide what to do when that happens, and run a Python script or trigger an API or do something else.
Yeah. Paul, I'm reminded of the story, and it came back up again for whatever reason, about a couple of teenagers that went and did some graffiti, some anti-Semitic graffiti on their high school, and the only reason they got caught is because they were students at that school and their phones had connected to the Wi-Fi network. Like, they were already there, and that was how it got connected. And I'd love to see that for the bandits as just regular clients, like being able to detect when new Wi-Fi clients are probing for networks, looking around, like someone pulls into our driveway and is casing the place to rob it.
Yeah,
and then they come back a couple weeks later.
Zero Chaos had the Bluetooth monitor, so he knew when his mother-in-law pulled up to the house because her car or phone or earpiece had a specific Bluetooth ID.
my favorite example of something like this is and you can Google that, there were hackers not only linked to Russian intelligence, but like Russian intelligence officers who have been indicted actually, who were trying to attack the OPCW lab, which is the something for the control of chemical weapons. And they tried to figure out what was going on in there. And so they literally rented a car and put a bunch of alpha antennas and pineapples in the back of that car. And they were actually detected by Dutch intelligence, and they arrested them right there on the spot. That's a crazy story. If you Google that, it's the OPCW hack. I think that was one of the things that when, sometimes you hit this point where you've been working on something like this for a while, and you're like, is it really worth it? Would anybody ever use that? And I think that's when the story came out, and I just saw that pineapple, and there must have been Dutch intelligence with little antennas going around. That's when I thought, okay, I gotta keep going. I'm going to keep on going with this. That's a super interesting story.
I remember the story. I'm just astonished that it's open source, because we get back to that Kismet question, in that Kismet, you're very much right. In my opinion, is very much the reconnaissance stuff, and it had the ability to do some very limited detection, and it wasn't really ever built for that. But Enzyme is above and beyond, and arguably starting to rival some commercial products already, and makes it accessible for those that don't have some sort of commercial product available to them, and students, and
Well, yeah, I mean that commercial product,
so
Larry, was Pony Express. It was the commercial product.
Yeah,
that I think about it.
and admittedly, Pone Pulse, that product.
Yep.
That wasn't cheap. I mean, my CFO, my wife, she wouldn't agree to let me put something like that in. But $40-$50 for Raspberry Pi and maybe a wireless adapter, could totally get that under the.
Between you and I, we could have a fleet of a couple dozen or probably a lot more sensors.
I don't know what you're talking about. I swear, like there's no Raspberry Pis here.
Leonard, are there
Since
plans?
when?
Are there plans to add Bluetooth support?
So I've heard that from several people. I've designed the code is designed to actually support modules. So everything is kind of right now encapsulated in the only module, which is the Pod 11 module, which is the 802.11 Wi-Fi standard. Maybe Bluetooth. I think I just got to catch up on a lot of things to understand Bluetooth attack surface a little more. So it has been designed to be extended in the future. I think one thing that I'm thinking about is could you connect one of those $30 little SDR software-defined radios to it, and look at other stuff. Maybe hack RF in the beginning. It's just, I think, very developer friendly. Because I think
you're just making more friends. I swear.
Yeah, I mean, because that's like something I always wanted to see in the Pony Express line that I don't think they ever officially added. I think they were working on it. I think they were just Bluetooth and Wi-Fi at the time.
So I could definitely see that. I think there's a lot of things, first of all, to do for Wi-Fi. It's designed to be modular. And another thing that I could think about is Zigbee and all of these automation things. There are some of these industrial IoT standards out there, which I also have no clue. So I would have to read up a lot of things first. But I could imagine there's some funky stuff going on in the wireless spectrum,
Yeah, you could tell when I unlocked my car, opened my garage door, conceivably, with the right hardware. I don't know if the Hack RF does what the limitations are. You guys know better than I. But being able to monitor all of the wireless spectrums, or as many as you can, was always a huge plus for me, right? Because I have some Zigbee, some Z-Wave stuff in my house. I want to be able to monitor that as well.
Yeah,
you think about Z-Wave with a CC1111 at $30. Now Zigbee with the CC2531 for about $10 for doing monitoring. The $30 RTL SDR. The possibilities are potentially endless for some of this type of stuff.
As endless as your USB power and bus speeds will allow. I would argue.
Get a powered hub for your Raspberry Pi if you want more than 2 alpha adapters.
Would you be limited by bus speed, right? I don't know what the USB bus data bus is, right, on the Pis. I'd assume there would be a limit. I don't know how you would hit that, but it would be a limit.
The Wi-Fi adapters send you pretty slim data, in fact, because they do a lot of the stuff on board in their systems. But I think the moment you want to do RTL or SDR, they just send you the whole bandwidth. That back then bus speed could really become an issue for sure.
Right.
Yeah. And Leonard, that's actually some testing that I'm doing end of this weekend into next as well about the Pi bus speed and some of this type of stuff.
Gosh.
But between USB 2, the Hack RF is still USB 2 supported and can max out the bandwidth for the bus there. But on the Pi 4, there's still the USB 3 bus, which RTL SDR and all those other devices I think could very easily handle. And then even add writing all that out to SD, an SSD on the same USB bus. I think we're well within in spec there. And then if you start thinking about something like you're getting a little bit more expensive, the Raspberry Pi compute module and the I/O board, you're converting USB 3 to PCIe. So yeah, you're doing pretty well, I think.
They're really hard to get right now. That was exactly what I was thinking about. I tried to get a hold of one. They're just really hard to get right now. I got a 3D printer recently. I mean, I just need more cases to print. I mean, that's
Yeah, it's amazing. Sorry, Lee. The cost of everything that's come down and just continues to come down over time, right? A lot of this equipment we're talking about was way more expensive if you could even get it. Now we can get USB dongles that do just this amazing stuff on the Raspberry Pi. Larry, I think that's why we started hacking on the WRT54G, was essentially get that low cost, a lot of functionality in a small embedded device. I think the Pis now have kind of surpassed that for this type of work.
Yeah, I mean, the Raspberry Pi 4 is just amazing. I mean, the part that breaks in it is the SD card from time to time. So always keep an image of that. But I mean, I'm just blown away by how the Raspberry Pi changed the world almost. I remember when the first one came out, and I think it's kind of VGA and no HDMI and everything, but that was so cool already. It just makes things accessible. That's what I love about it.
Lee?
I mean, it sounds like you could do a Kickstarter right now with something like the Flipper that raised $4 million in, was it, like 2 weeks?
Yeah, that's actually the Flipper thing. I'm also trying to get a hold of one of those and just see what that does to Enzyme. That's part of the fun too. Just also play a little bit of the red team role, and just see what happens when you turn that thing on and just research it.
So Leonard, when you were talking earlier, and the folks were setting stuff up, you said you might be able to give us a demo. Yeah,
I can. I mean, I can share my screen, show you the web interface if you want. Just click around and get you a feeling of it.
That'd be awesome. And we had another request from some folks as well. They want to see Gary. Gary's famous now.
I think Gary's outside right now. I live in Houston.
Oh no!
So there's a big garden, and he's walking around somewhere outside. If I find him, if I hear him, I'm going to get him inside.
Awesome. Gary's famous.
Mm-hmm.
Gary's my cat, and he's great. Should I just share my screen and show some of it?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. Let's go. I'm going to share my platform. Here we go. I guess you see that, right?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to keep it short. I just want to give you a feeling of what it does. I'm on purpose. I'm calling it a Wi-Fi defense system because I think really that's what it is. I don't think it's an intrusion detection system, but because I think it does more. I have zoomed in here. You see I'm at 133%, so everyone can see a little more. I will not guarantee that my CSS and my HTML will survive that. So I think it will. We'll see. I might have to zoom down back to 100%. It works on mobile pretty well, actually. So I'm logging in. What we have here is that's kind of my deployment here in my living room. Has 2 alpha adapters on it. I think one is listening on the 2.4 gigahertz, and the other one's on the 5 gigahertz, 5G. I actually have the anonymizer turned on. That is a feature that's not documented yet, but it will basically scramble all the MAC addresses and the SSIDs because I do not want to constantly dox myself with SSIDs and BSSIDs in range. So if you ever want a demo of this, you can actually turn the anonymize feature on. It's going to keep a table of the original SSID and then what it translated to. So if you see weird SSIDs in here, I simply took the WiggleNet top 1,000 or something list of SSIDs and replaced them randomly in it. Basically, what you see is it currently has no alerts. It has no contacts. A contact is basically when a bandit, which I can show in a second, is detected in your environment. And you got system status overall. If that's green, all's well. This might change to yellow or to red if something with the system itself is not right, like someone unplugs one of the Wi-Fi networks. Go through the last 5 alerts that were active here. You see that from a few days ago. This was actually when I tried out the new Wi-Fi Pineapple, which is in this corner over there, so I can't show it right now, but I just tried the new Mark 7 Wi-Fi Pineapple. So that were the alerts that triggered there. Showed you if it had any bandit contacts. So like I said, contacts are whenever a defined bandit is tracked, and we'll actually try to follow it. There's some logic there. And then we see here that I got my 2 alpha adapters here, and they're both running as a monitor probe. A monitor probe is basically the thing that that runs an enzyme that monitors the whole spectrum that you configured it to. I told it to listen. This one here is listening on all the 2.4 gigahertz channels. This one here is listening on all the 5 gigahertz channels. So you already see there's way more traffic here on my 2 gigahertz Wi-Fi environment. You see here, this is all the frames that were recorded kind of in total. It's always funny when neighbors have a party and all the iPhones and everything else starts to show up. There was in the before times, before last year, there were always funny spikes in here. And you can see when everyone left again. That was always interesting. Click on the networks. You get an overview here of all the networks that are in range. Like I said, these SSIDs and the MAC addresses are all scrambled. But I could click this one here. Is in fact, this is mine. This you see here has like very, very high signal strength. I click on it. It shows you all the channels that it's currently seeing it on. It shows you which of these channels is the most active right now, which I believe is channel 1. If I click on it, I'm actually getting an overview here of what's going on in this network. The beacon rate is interesting. The beacon rate is basically every access point out there is constantly advertising its existence. And this is what your iPhone, your computer, anything that builds you a list of all the networks in range, they're just listening for these beacon frames. And these beacon frames say, hey, I'm network so-and-so corporate guest. I'm on this channel. I support these modes, and you can connect to me if you want to. If someone is trying to start an evil twin attack or something else that would that would kind of spin up a second access point that looks like yours, trying to lure you into it, by definition, the beacon rate is going to change because you still record all the beacons from your access point. But on top of that, there's definitely going to be a second access point adding more beacons here. So you can set this limit, which I set to 200 to really be more, maybe 70 or so. When that crosses over it, you get an alert and it says you got an unusual rate of beacons going on here in your environment. You see here, this is your signals that have been recorded in the last 5 minutes per channel, and then also with their signal strength. And you see down here, this here is this waterfall that I was talking about, which is on this network, because it's such a high signal strength, it doesn't show you very much. So let me change to one. Let's go to this one here. That's probably the neighbors. That one. You see this here? This is basically this track of this access point, and this red line here is where Enzyme detected that this is a track. If now I was at a different location of this access point, and I would be advertising the same network acting like that access point, you would have a second track popping up here somewhere, either to the right if it's closer to you, or to the left if it's further away. If I run this for the last 24 hours, you see here that, in fact, this thing was off from 9:30 Central to, in the morning, 6:15 Central. For some reason, this access point was off. And it did detect here a second track. I think my detection here is not fully tuned for this setup, but this year it would have sent you an alert and say like, hey, I detected 2 tracks, but it only did so for probably 1 minute, and there's a threshold when it actually sends an alert. So it would have probably not been a false positive. But this year, this is the Hunt for Red October kind of display, where you, instead of tracking the sonar signal of a vessel, you actually track the signal strength of an access point, and you would see when it changes. Then we've got all the alerts, of course. So let's take this one here, for example. This one. This shows me that there was the management access point of a ESP8266D authentication platform was detected. Shows me when it was first seen, last seen. It applied an ID to it, so you can track it later. Showed me how many frames, which subsystem. Shows you all kinds of related information. Other alerts in here. This one, multiple signal tracks. That's what I mentioned. Whenever there's multiple of these tracks, it's usually a pretty bad sign. I think in that case, that was me experimenting with an attack platform trying to detect it. I think Enzyme has about 10 different alerts built in by default, and it also has all these bandits built in here by default. And you see here that it will detect all kinds of Wi-Fi pineapples. It will detect Wi-Fi Fisher. It will detect this the author. So basically, the moment you turn this on, it's gonna cause what's called a contact. And you can also create your own if you want to. So let's do this, create a new bandit, and you can give it all kinds of identifiers. So you could say when something comes in that is advertising the SSID test with a signal strength in between this or with a specific fingerprint, you can add all of these different identifiers and build your own bandit definitions. So if you're looking for something very specific, you can set it up this way and it will alert you, like a little like in Clifford Stahl's The Cuckoo's Egg, where he set up this alert whenever the attacker comes back. It's a little like that. It might have been a little inspired by that too.
Only he was using patch cables at the time.
And jingling his keys, right?
I was just talking to Cliff on the phone like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice. I think, Jeff, I actually read the book after you recommended it at some conference. That's how that came together. So what I can actually do, I didn't plan this for the demo, so let's hope it works, but I can just plug this battery into this e-authenticator platform and not even start an attack, but just turn the device on, and I think it should be detected. So I'm going to plug this in. I don't know if you see my video right now or not, but it just turned itself on. And I believe that we should, within a few moments, if the demo gods are with me today, we should actually see a new alert coming in that will automatically refresh. There we go.
Oh, there we go.
I didn't even touch it. I just turned it on. It's still on the kind of standard menu. And it immediately says I got a bandit contact, the ESP8266D author. And it tells me constant frames up. It's now tracking it. And I could now send one of these tracker devices, which I currently don't have set up. The documentation shows these and actually has a few screenshots here. Let me just show you that real quick, and then I'm done with my demo. But in my release blog post here on enzyme.org, you will actually see this. That's the interface of this tracker device that you put on a USB battery, take with you, or put a little interface on top of it, a little display on top of it on a Raspberry Pi. And then now I could follow this, and I would be able to physically locate this bandit that I just turned on by instructing this tracker to find it, basically. So that's another thing that this thing do. I'm working on making this easier and this a little more accessible, because you need like another piece of hardware. This is another $25 off of Amazon. But this is all going to be easier in the future. But I've played around with it where I asked someone to hide a pineapple somewhere in the building, and I tried to find it, and it actually worked. So that was a fun exercise. But yeah, just to give an impression of what it does, that's the Enzyme interface, and it's all, like I said, enzyme.org. If you go to download, I have Debian packages, and there is in the documentation right here, we have the installation guide for an Ubuntu server if you want to use that, or for the Raspberry Pi, and it's about 5 steps. And then you configure it, and you start it, and you open the web interface, and you're good to go.
When you showed the demo, Leonard, my thoughts went initially to how do I get an antenna on the outside of my house? So now I'm looking for recommendations, because I want to monitor, like, not just my house, but like most of my neighborhood as well. Because I think that would be fun. That would give me lots more data to play around with.
That's true.
Paul, don't put the antenna outside. Just put the whole Raspberry Pi outside in a waterproof case. Ask me how I know this.
Interesting. We must chat later.
Yeah, question.
Well, I wanted to make a comment real quick for those that are just listening to this. It's Enzyme without an E on it, if you're trying to find it. But as long as I'm talking, I am somewhat goaded into asking the dreaded PCI question. Do you have any idea, Leonard, what PCI requirement you satisfy with this device?
So here's a funny story. I tried to find that out, and here's an ask for the community. If someone could tell me that would be awesome. Because I'm not sure. I think I satisfy something with this from a PCI perspective. I was talking at a bar during RSA.
That's the best place to find people that do PCI as a bar.
Find some PCI consultant who couldn't really tell me. He was not sure. So I'm still not sure, because I haven't met any PCI consultants. If someone could tell me, I'd be very interested. I'm sure it's
so Paul, Paul, the one requirement minus 2.
11.1
There you go.
is monitoring Wi-Fi. There is a monitoring Wi-Fi networks in PCI, right?
11.1 is
11.1.
monitor for the presence of Wi-Fi networks and rogue devices and unauthorized hotspots, and so on and so forth. So you're absolutely falling squarely under 11.1.
See, I should have like a PCI like cheat sheet, but I have Jeff, so it's good.
Now what you need, Paul, is like mad money. You need actually a PCI buzzword bingo board. And, we can just hit it every time Jeff says,
"Oh, hey, it's Jeff. Jeff is here."
We
hey, welcome,
do that.
Jeff.
It's Jeff. Yeah,
Hi.
we do that on Security and Compliance Weekly already. We Scott keeps a counter going, and there's a buzzer that goes off every time that PCI is mentioned, as well as pen testing.
Well, that's awesome. I was just stumbling along, and I actually stumbled into this Skype call. So it's amazing how that happens.
Is that a pun about Network Stumbler? Is that Wi-Fi Stumbler? Isn't it? That's a thing.
Wow.
Right?
Wow. That was a stretch, Paul.
That was a stretch,
Cool.
right?
I think you're overthinking
That's where
it,
we were
Paul.
talking about Wi-Fi. That's where my brain was. Leonard, we just have 5 questions for you. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I think I am.
3 words to describe yourself.
Ooh.
That's
All German.
Yeah, that's 3 now, yeah.
Friendly.
2. If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Ooh. Poison. I don't know what that says about me, but it would probably be poison.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Oh God.
That's a great title. I love it.
That's my title.
Oh, there's so many things. So
Who let the
probably
cat
something not
out?
to do. Sorry, it's. Oh yeah. Plan your product. How to plan your product before you start a company behind it, so you don't have to fix all your early mistakes of building it without any commercial intent behind it.
That's
That
a
haunts
long.
me until today.
That's a long
That's a long title,
It
and
is
it's
a
a
long
boring
title.
book,
Well, Leonard,
but
I
it's
tell
my
you
book.
what, I would totally read that. Totally read that.
Yeah. So I think Leonard had it right with the title and then the subtitle
Yes.
was, "Oh God, there's so many things," and then that title for the.
You know what? That's my book. That's
Yeah,
my book.
I
That's
like
my
it.
book. Oh
I like
God, there's so many things.
Leonard, what is your favorite hacker movie, and why is it hack? No, what's your favorite hacker movie?
Favorite hacker movie is. God, I'm so bad with movies. It is. I mean, it might probably just be hackers. Honestly,
There you
that's
go.
a boring answer, but I think that's it.
I approve. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or
Alive,
otherwise.
Fictional or otherwise.
Race
Alive,
condition.
dead, fictional.
What
otherwise.
I forgot her name. What's the
Angelina
Parents.
Jolie.
George Clooney's wife? Because I think she's awesome, and she's not standing in the shadow of George Clooney. Except I
Mrs.
remember his
Clooney.
name, but not hers. I know it's a bad example.
Mrs. Clooney.
And she's very Mrs. Clooney, and she's very. I think she's a great person. And from father, celebrity. You know,
Why not just George Clooney?
I take both of them. How awesome is that?
There you go. There you go.
Clooney's. It's the Clooney's.
Leonard,
All right.
thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you.
Thanks for having me. That was fun.
Well, with that, we'll
Good
take a
seeing
short
you,
break.
Grandpa.
Dutch Schwartz is coming up next to talk about migrating from on-prem to the cloud. Stick around. With the skills gap increasing, it's more important than ever to train your staff effectively and efficiently. Offensive Security provides training for your organization designed by the same minds behind Kali Linux. Here are 2 recent offerings from OffSec. OffSec Academy gives you the chance to earn industry-leading OSCP certification with dedicated one-on-one mentoring. You can also try Proving Grounds Enterprise, created exclusively by Offensive Security's InfoSec experts for highly realistic simulated networks. Visit securityweekly.com/offsec to learn more. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back to Paul's Security Weekly. If you have a specific guest or topic you'd like us to cover on one of the upcoming shows, you can submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests. Complete that form. We review those on a regular basis, and we'll reach out to everyone once they are reviewed. Dutch Schwartz is the principal security specialist from Amazon Web Services. Over 25 years of experience, ranging from working for startups to Fortune 500 companies. He joins us today to talk about cloud migration. Dutch, welcome to Paul's Security Weekly.
Hey, Paul. Thrilled to be here. Good to see you.
Nice to have you. Dutch was on a BSW episode. I don't remember when. It was sometime somewhere in the archives. So it's nice to have you here.
It was this year.
Was it this year?
Yeah.
Dude, my timeline's all messed up with that. We do so many shows a week. It seems like,
Sure.
was that last year, this year? Episode 206 of BSW is what my producers tell me in my head. So it's good to have you here, Dutch.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be here.
Dutch, I don't think I got a chance to ask you on BSW being a shorter show, but how did you get started in information security?
Yeah, it's hopefully a good origin story, right? You hope to have that when you look backwards. So I was.
It's your story.
Your origin story, right?
It's my origin story, right? Yeah. No, I was an infantry officer in the Army, which doesn't, on the surface, lend itself to this field necessarily. But yeah, I was transitioning and frankly looking at leadership roles and different things. And I had a friend who was also moving from active duty to the reserves, and her parents coincidentally happened to be in the storage industry in Boulder, Colorado, which at that time was Storage Alley, right? Storage Tech and Exabyte, etc. Anyway, so she had been interviewing and had found a role in the space and said, I really think you should go interview with this systems integrator. And I said, yeah, I mean, I like tech stuff, but I don't have a degree. I don't really have any, really heavy training in that area. And she's like, no, I think that, the ability to learn stuff quickly, and to be fair, they were also selling into the federal space, right? So, and I was cleared at the time, was how I got in. And so, luckily, back then in the 90s, it was easy to get in, and I learned, from my engineers, I learned by, lunch and learns and self-taught for the majority of the time. So that's how I got into just technology in general. And then I pivoted about 10 years ago, probably. I was mostly in networking and embedded computing for the previous 15 years, and then thought security looked like it's the hot space, right? To start to tool myself up and move that direction.
And when did you make the move over to Amazon?
Just under 2 years ago.
Did you have cloud experience or?
Yeah, I had some. So in the prior role, I was kind of leaning into. I was one of the people. I worked at Forcepoint Raytheon, and so I was really doing SD-WAN, kind of SASE was just kind of really kind of solidifying at that point. So yeah, I mean, I had experience in terms of that space a little bit, but really from AWS standpoint, what they're looking for was a kind of programmatic experience and frankly some broad experience to kind of bring that to the role. So kind of on a functional day-to-day basis, what I do is work with CISOs, their direct reports and architects, and really sort of help them make that move either faster or or more securely.
That's what's that like? Is that people who want to embrace it have lots of questions, or is it like a mixed bag?
Yeah, so for me specifically, we have a team of folks like me. So for me specifically, I have the kind of the top tier folks, right? So they're typically 18 months, 2 years, maybe significantly. Maybe they were an early adopter, right? Mm-hmm. So you just think of any of the public names. Let's Capital One, right? I mean, so that's a name that's out there publicly that's known. So it would be those kinds of customers. So it's not me sort of helping them understand how to move to the cloud as much as we're some percentage down our journey. We have, 30, 40, 50% of our data or payloads in the cloud. How do we continue to accelerate that? But I have others on the team who are more focused on, SMB, startup type spaces.
So they're using like 12 of the 147 Amazon services as opposed to 6.
They're using, I'll give you a generally, and I would say that they're probably using 150 services would not be atypical.
That's how many services are there within AWS today?
Oh, see, now you're going to quiz me, and I would have to look this morning. I mean, it's over 200.
Gotcha. Okay.
And name them.
Just name them
alphabetically or by age. So S3 first.
Lexigraphically.
I think there's a technical term for it. It's this. It's metric ass fuck ton.
I think you captured that nicely, Joff.
That's my brilliant word for the evening, and I'm out. See
Dutch, you should use that. I mean, you should totally use that with your customers, right? When they ask you that.
No, and I'm quoting you. I'm going to say this is the one thing I picked up on the show.
It's awesome.
Actually, I think I might have used that with my customers. Only some of them deserve
only
that
some of them,
treatment.
Right? Some are a little more reserved. Yeah.
Dutch, one of the things that I'm kind of pushing for, albeit a little bit hesitantly because I still have questions. So now I'm getting like free consulting, but I mean it's relevant. When we look at using rolling out a new service, right?
Sure.
I mean, whatever it is, and there's usually like companies that you can go pay for a SaaS service and they do it, right? Sure. I can roll the stuff all on my own. But what I'm coming down to is I want to use a cloud native service and build a much smaller piece of that and have like the fullest amount of control over that particular service. So we can look at things like file sharing, like Box and Dropbox was actually the example I was talking about. But you can go to a lot of different SaaS services. Like there's a niche there. How do you enable companies to do that in the best way possible, most securely and easily? Like sell me on it, I guess. Help me sell it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to the business case, and I know it's like a lame answer, but that's really the truth. Like, you premised it with, I want control and I want the ability to dig in, and so that's really where you make that choice, right?
Yeah.
If I just need a shrink wrap product, and I'm not being pejorative there, like I don't need to really do any tooling or make any changes to it, then buy a service that's already packaged up and potentially even a managed service, right? If that works for you. But if you're really talking about something that's critical to your business, right? Whatever that either that business process or the site or the data, if that's critical and you want to have, granular control over that, access to it, the ability to I think you're kind of leaning towards the ability to make it into microservices and deploy it different ways, then that's the case for, okay, now I want to go cloud native, with whomever, whichever the providers that you think is the best fit for you. And the reality is many customers have more than one, right? I mean, multi-cloud is a legitimate thing, right? Most at scale, most enterprises have one that's more of a primary, if you will, than others. But it could be it could be by geo, it could be by business unit, it could be by the types of payload that they use. So they make those choices. And as we know, in a lot of cases, security is not at the front of that decision, right? So it's part of our role to get that, push that into the forefront and say, hey, let us help you make that choice, as opposed to I'll make something up, as opposed to I want to I went to a Kubernetes flavor that's a little bit more esoteric, and it works really well because of this application. And then the security team says, "Wow, we don't have any, we don't have experience in that. It's going to be much harder to secure, right?" So it's part of my role too to work with the VPs of engineering, devs, et cetera, to kind of pull that forward, right? So that security gets involved in the conversation.
Yeah, it's like how much control do I want versus how much responsibility do I want? Like in the file transfer thing, I don't want it. I want as little like file system responsibility. Like I want S3 or some other AWS service, right, to do that part of it. I want to control the front end application because that's
Right.
where I need to basically tune it to my business. And it's critical enough where I want to do that I don't want to go to, Box or something else. I mean, this is basically
Right.
like your world. You're helping customers navigate these types of things all the time, right?
Yeah, so you're looking at a combination of what's the business, what's really the business driver, right? And let's make sure that we're lined up with that. What's my auditory or compliance, right, portion of that? Because that plays a role too.
Ooh,
so
you said the magic word.
I know I did, and I watched the show, so I know it, right? So that's something you need to consider. So I sometimes get asked, hopefully because it's a learning experience, what mistakes, not really mistakes, but what things could people do better sort of as you look backwards after the fact? And that's one of them. You have to make sure that your compliance audit is, whatever the bodies that you use, right, from a testing and compliance standpoint, that they really understand the environment that you're going into. Because in candor, some controls, you should kind of imply there, Paul, some controls won't be important anymore, or they're not relevant, right?
Right.
So if I'm way up in the stack, then the cloud service provider is doing, a lot of the other pieces. So the audit is, null, for those things, because you aren't doing the OS as an example. So
Right.
that's
I've got the configuration. I've got some cloud services. I've got some Lambda functions. I just want to write code and tune the
Right.
application to me. I want as much of the rest of the stuff to be on the cloud provider.
to that point, you could focus high in the
into
stack,
play?
right? So you're focusing on L7 instead of 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tyler?
Yeah, I was just curious, does the cost comparison and return on investment still come into play for cloud providers and that kind of big shift? I know initially that was one of the big arguments, but we've seen a kind of a back shift from that where even some of the hybrid models are starting to shift back to on-prem stuff. So where does the big advantage come from? And from a cost comparison and return on investment, is a lot of that recouped from the security aspects of what's being offloaded to the cloud providers?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there, right? So let me just stay sort of with the cost thing. So it's still a driving force for sure in a lot of those. Let's just pick a round number and say 10% of enterprises at scale are heavy into the cloud, like more than 10 or 20%. That still leaves a significant amount of businesses and enterprises, right, that aren't really, again, maybe they're using cloud, and you have to define that, because that could just mean, to Paul's point, I'm using Box and I'm using Salesforce. Those are fine, but I mean, it's not cloud in the sense of, I'm doing serverless, microservices, like much more complex things, right? Cost is still a driving factor for sure, but I think more the conversation is now around flexibility and agility, right? So what does it allow me to, I can make choices very fast. And then if those choices aren't, turning out the way that I had hoped, it's a two-way door, right? I can back away from that quickly, right? So I'm an NGFW guy, right? So it's a different type of project. I'm going to roll this out across the globe. That's a 18-month, 2-year project easily, right? This is very different. So as a cloud service choice, I can turn something on fairly low lift, and I can turn it back off. Or I can say, ooh, okay, I only want to use fill in the blank service, right, for these cases, right? So it's really flexibility and then agility. So those two things together, coupled, and then you get scale, right? So if I look at DevOps conversations, it's around, gosh, we used to do TikTok or 2 major releases a year. Now we're doing 30 pushes to prod a day. So as a security team, that's a challenge, right? And so one of those ways that you scale, at least commensurate with that, is to use cloud services.
At a certain scale, it's kind of interesting when I listen to you describe that, Dutch. It's like at a certain size enterprise, I'm going to put my budget into some React developers and some AWS engineers. And like you could do so much with just like they can create custom business applications for you, for your customers, versus going to try and buy a bunch of stuff off the shelf, even it's in the cloud, and trying to integrate it all together. In the long run, that could end up costing you more and not meeting all of your requirements. And I think for business critical stuff, it was a Steve Jobs quote, right? Like whatever's most critical to your business, you need to own that and write it and control it wholeheartedly and not rely on other people. And I think this is a really good kind of journey that we're all on, recognizing like this is critical. And you can do, I think, more cheaper, even if to pay the developers and keep them on staff, than you can trying to like go buy all this shrink, air quote shrink wrap stuff and tying it all together.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, and it's a spectrum, right? I don't in any way think it's a one size fits all, right? If we all left tomorrow and there's 6 of us in the company, that's materially different, right? We'd have mostly a whiteboard and we could draw things out very differently. As I look at sort of digitally native companies today, which wasn't even a term really a decade ago, those came out of the 2008-2009 financial crisis in large part. Right. And so they had sort of the pressure. I don't want to say it was the opportunity, but they had the pressure. So they had to change the way that they went to the marketplace. But if you're an older company and large, you have tens of thousands of employees and you're an 80-year-old company, that's a much different process, right? How you rationalize, okay, which things do we want to lift and shift? Should we refactor? Which pieces are those? Paul, to your point, and then which do we want to just rewrite? Because this is going to be the new thing. That critical app or what have you that's important. So, but everybody's somewhere on that spectrum, right? And so it's my job to kind of start really high, frankly, and say, hey, there's 3 sort of categories of risk. Which one is it for you? Is it operational risk? Is it litigation risk? And I just kind of step down from there, and then we zero in and say, okay, here's the 2 or 3 key business initiatives this year. Now let's put your CISO security architect lens on that. Cool. Now what does that mean? And that helps rationalize how we talk to the business. And that's really critical. And the example I give sometimes is, look, if you're talking to your CFO about bots, you're wrong approach. I would feel pretty confident with, right? But you could talk about, hey, user experience is really critical on this new application. Per the whole C-suite, they're really focused on this. We want to launch in October. Anything that would interrupt that customer experience is bad. And then right? But you have to talk to them about it that way. You can't talk to them about a vol matrix or bots or that's a much more difficult conversation. Frankly, we don't want it backwards on us, right? We don't understand Sarbanes-Oxley the same way that your CFO would. So you have to talk to them in a human way. Right, that helps them understand what's this mean to the business.
I think go ahead, Tyler.
Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to say, I think a lot of the security impacts when I talk to people and analyze this are really with expertise in being familiar with the platform. And I think where people get in trouble is it's all new and they don't understand it well enough to be able to first design it and implement it, because kind of like the first time through, especially when I design and implement stuff in the cloud, I'm like, that works, but I don't fully understand why it all works out, fits together yet. But then once you get more comfortable with it, now you're like, oh, now I can apply these security controls. Is that a similar kind of journey that I think many companies are on with moving from on-premise to the cloud? It's just gaining that familiarity with it.
Yeah, and you just have to try something. And I sometimes, depending on the audience, I would say it one of 2 ways, right? Like if they're kind of nerdy, then I'd be like, hey, remember when Iron Man said sometimes you have to run before you can walk? Yeah. Sometimes that's the right thing. Another way, from my military background, right? I mean, we definitely have a principle of you have to get a quick victory, right? You have to attack and gain a foothold, right? And so it's the same in the business world, right? You should pick an application or a project and get that win. And I don't even just sort of politically and sort of for the visibility reasons, for yourself and for your team, right? So that you can get comfortable. So pick something that's been done by others before. Yeah. It's pretty well documented, right? You can go talk to 3 or 4 people in your Discord or Slack channel and get some tips and get that win under your belt, right? And that's the beauty of it. Then you can just iterate the heck out of that, right? You go, okay, cool, that worked, or it didn't work, but you can just spin that, right? Like I said, a lot of these choices are 2-way doors. Right? You run fast at it and you run right back out when it doesn't work. And that's really the flexibility piece that you get from any cloud offering.
Yeah. Jeff and then Tyler.
Or did Tyler go?
Sorry.
Yeah,
Tyler then Jeff.
Me.
Age before beauty, my friend. Age before beauty.
So Jeff, then Tyler.
I guess that means I'm going first. So I would, a lot of my customers, and I do PCI, are doing more and more with AWS. And I guess my first exposure to it was, I'm not sure exactly when AWS started, but I've been looking at it for 7 or 8 years. And back when it was new, the allure was, save a lot of money. It's cheaper. Just throw everything on the cloud. And whether this was true or not, the promise of all your security / compliance worries go away because it's all being done now in AWS, which wasn't the case. I will say AWS has done a great job lately of recognizing that they need to teach their clients. I don't know if it was your team that was involved with this or not, but I'm just saying this in general, that it's not as simple as just throw everything into an AWS cloud and all your compliance worries go away. What I'm seeing, to echo what Paul said, is there's definitely a lot of people that are they just don't understand the technology and how the security requirements within something like PCI still applies. You just have to do it differently, or it looks different. Right. Offhandedly, do you happen to know Ian Coldwater?
I know who. Yeah, I know.
You
not
know who
close,
she is,
but yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, she and I. It's been before the lockdown. She and I would bump into each other at many conferences, and we finally sat down and had a very long conversation. Here's the PCI requirements. Here's how you do it. Not necessarily specifically on AWS, but in a cloud, in Kubernetes. What I see is the people don't know how to apply it, and I have a question more for the other co-hosts, but you could probably weigh on this too. Recent example just this past week, discussing the need for doing network penetration testing, both externally, which is internet facing, but also internally. And our clients but we don't really have a network. It's all just serverless and it's all lines of code. I'm like, yeah, but you still need to do a test. So we had some interesting conversations about that. Would love your comment on that. That's one thing. The other thing is I'm seeing more and more where the merchants who are the initial entity that's on the hook for PCI are engaging not with AWS directly, but with I'll call them hosting providers that are using AWS, as the backbone. They're hosting in AWS, so they're setting up the cloud environments, the customer environments on their behalf, and that's complicated. Just trying to sort out. Everybody agrees. Well, all the security requirements need to be met. The challenge becomes who's responsible for what, and that's where AWS has done a great job of putting together. I don't know exactly what they call it, but basically it's a shared responsibility
model. Yeah.
Which is it's a great starting point, but then have the conversation. Okay, if AWS isn't doing it by default, is it the hosting provider? Is it the merchant? Is it other third parties that the hosting provider has engaged, particularly the payment gateways and and that thing? That's the challenges that I'm seeing lately. Comments, thoughts?
Yeah, so we could probably do a couple hours just on all those. So I'll start with the cost thing. I mean, there's definitely areas where you get cost savings, no doubt, right? So I won't sort of belabor those. But again, I think that one thing that it does is it allows you to get to shift where you put your focus, right? So, it allows you to kind of, to Paul's point, like, what's my most critical thing, right? And focus on that. Whether it's the new application that you're putting out or the site you're hosting, it allows you to shift the focus there. And so sort of that piece of the shared responsibility model, you nailed it. So when I get asked, again, like what people often, or where they miss the most. So like I said, one of them is making sure you're aligned to the business because it's the business that probably selected to go to the cloud, right? Number two, it's dig deep into the shared responsibility model. And again, all providers have a concept around this, and they're fairly similar, right, conceptually. So somebody on the customer side really needs to understand it, and frankly, then you should push hard on your provider, whichever CSP or if it's somebody else, for them to really, you got to do like a tabletop, in my estimation. Like you should hash that out and say, if this happens. Right, it's one thing to look at a matrix, but you should tabletop it in my estimation, right? And say if this happens, who's actually the person who has the lead? And you could do a racing matrix or however you want to kind of peel that onion. So did I answer the front part of your question there?
You did.
Okay, and then I think the back part of the question was, how do we get better? Yeah, the supply chain, I'll just call it supply chain loosely as it relates to the auditory requirements. It's challenging, right? When I talk with people in highly regulated spaces, So think FinServ Healthcare, they'll write that into the contractual agreements, right? So there won't be a fourth party, right? They'll just hardcore write it in, right? To eliminate that it doesn't go another tier, right? That's when it really starts, it becomes problematic, is when it goes like 4 or 5 tiers down, right? That person's outsourced some other part, right? So they'll just write it into their contract that's not allowable. If you can't do that, then you have to go back to, you've got to make a determination who is responsible for that. And this kind of circles back to your early point. I don't think that any of the cloud providers ever said, we got you 100% on, right? We always said, hey, we've got you here, right? So where that makes sense is, hey, you don't have to do SOC compliance or ISO or any of the 50 or 60 or 100 certs that any of the providers have. That does eliminate that, right? You don't have to do some of that, but you still have to, as you go up the stack, you have to think about who does that. And you're right. If it's not explicitly the cloud provider, then it's you, and that you is some combo of you and any other party that's in between those two. So you really have to work that out. So again, I'm going back to that other point, which is whoever's doing audits for you needs to understand that cloud environment, right? And so there's efforts, I'll just be generic, there's efforts to create kind of cloud audit academies that's happening in the space across multiple people. So that would be something that I would encourage people to look at, is make sure your provider, the audit provider, understands the cloud environment that you are specifically in.
Let me push back real quick on one thing, and then Tyler, and then
Sure.
I'll yield the floor to Tyler. In the early days, my first exposure to AWS, which was probably going back to 2013, 2014, and I'm dealing with customers who had recently signed up for AWS. I would say that there was a gray area between what they thought that they were getting. And and I looked at the paperwork and the documentation, and it was very clear in writing what AWS signed up for back in the early days, and it was essentially requirement 9 stuff, data center stuff. We've got you in terms of lights and
physical
power,
data
space.
center, right?
Mm-hmm. But I and this is somewhat hearsay, but I swear I had customers say, well, the sales guy that was selling this, he led us to believe, and it could absolutely have been in their head, that we were getting more. And the issue was coming up primarily for security testing. Who does the vulnerability scanning, who's doing the penetration testing, who's doing those, the logging and the monitoring, those types of activities. In writing, I absolutely agree with you, but AWS would lead with, we're PCI compliant, but you had to read the small print. Yes, we're PCI compliant as a service provider. We're covering all the requirement 9 data center stuff. That was there, but it was quite literally in the small print, pages deep. But and not that any vendor in the world has ever preyed on the naivete or ignorance of their customers in order to sell something. A lot of people don't know any better. They're like, well, it's AWS. They say they're PCI compliant. I'm good. It's not like that now, and not that it ever was then, but that was just some early experiences. Like I said, AWS and the others who will not name major players are all on board with, we've got to be explicit about what we do and don't do, so the customer knows what they're getting into, what they're getting and what they're not getting. That's my only pushback.
Yeah, and I don't doubt at all that could have been the experience. It certainly could have happened. And I agree with your latter comment, which is all certainly the 3 major, right, from a share standpoint, providers are very like I feel like I say it too many times a day, right? Like share responsibility, like it's in the front of every deck. As it is in my peers, right, from other companies. So yeah, and maybe we've just gotten better at saying, hey, look, we have to have that conversation. That's why I brought it up, right? It's really important. I'm saying it again. Somebody really has to understand the shared responsibility model. I would strongly encourage a tabletop exercise to include whomever. So testers, auditors, if that's a feasible way of doing that.
Or if you get me as a QSA or my company, you're going to go through it. Maybe not as a tabletop, but we're going to sit down and figure out who's doing what. Because you're in the middle of the PCI assessment. We have to be able to answer. You're doing this. You're not doing it. You're not responsible. Fair. Who is responsible? So, at least annually, it's going to happen if you're playing in the PCI space. I yield to Tyler.
Hey, Tyler.
I'm just kind of curious from the offensive side. We obviously see a lot of people get this very wrong, right? Are there good resources and or configurations guides that we'll say AWS or the shared model? Where are people supposed to go to kind of learn and figure out how to adopt this hybrid or this cloud adoption properly? If you've got a small security team, a small budget, are there cases where you're going to steer them against that just because they don't have the expertise? And if they don't have the expertise, how do you suggest kind of a journey down that path in order to begin looking at that? Because we see companies not know what IAM roles are. We see mismanagement of keys. If I'm going to own an AWS instance, like it's never AWS's fault, right? It's poor management, poor understanding of how these roles work, how the cloud actually functions, whose responsibility, how S3 works.
Yeah,
all these
we
things
never
kind of
see
fall into the
exposed
client.
S3 shares ever.
No.
Never. Yeah. So I think the front part of your question is the resources. Yeah. And again, to be fair, I try to be consistent. The other, all three major providers have those, right? They do it in a variety of ways. So for us specifically, we've got like the macro, really deep dive. It's the cloud adoption framework, right? We took the first 4,000 customers. We looked with pro services, with our consultancies, with a variety of kind of stakeholders, and we looked backwards and said, what were the lessons, right, that we learned? And that cloud adoption framework, there's a security pillar, no shock, right? You just keep double clicking down, and you're going to get to a part where there's a well-architected review tool that would allow you to do some of that baselining. If I had 1 hour with somebody, which is the question I get sometimes asked, I go right to a set of 10 to 20, depends on who they are and kind of their size. Simple, do these things. We know over time, if you do these things correctly, that it vastly minimizes any chances of things going wrong. And Paul, both of you guys named a couple of them, right? One is you have to nail IAM in the cloud. I would say irrespective of provider, you really have to nail IAM, because it's if you treat the cloud as if it was the data center you used to have, then you've missed some of the opportunity, but also, frankly, some of the intricacies of how things are tied together, right? So everything hinges on identity and access management for the provider, from the provider standpoint. So you have to nail that correctly. You have to do key management. I'm not going to rattle them all off, but yeah, we have a short set, via video and a variety of different kind of delivery ways of doing that. So I had a friend who's a former CISO at a really large entity, and he's gone to working for in the charity space, and it's a small team, to your point, and they're not, they don't have the cloud expertise. And that's a set of resources I sent them. Hey, watch these 3 videos. Some are from external sources, right? Hey, do these 3 things. Look at these resources, and then come back to me, right, when you have some questions. And the last part of your question, I think, was how would you get started? I'll go back to find a simple win, right? So don't do the most complex or even maybe the most valuable part of your business first. Do something simple. To get that expertise built up.
That's what's hard, though. I mean, because if you put priority on IAM, that's not just like a set it and forget it thing. As you progress and do more in the cloud, it's an iterative process to get IAM.
It's not a set it and forget it, right? It's not like I set up Active Directory and I'm done. Yeah, you're right, because things trigger based off of that, right? Access to the resources and the roles. So you do that. It has to be that is something that from my perspective, an ongoing thing, right? But you need to try to nail it really well at the beginning. Yep. But yeah, you've absolutely got to iterate that 100%.
And when we're moving from on-prem to the cloud, how do you recommend people approach that? Do you have them literally start with like, all right, take this big honking thing and then just like host it in the cloud, and then break pieces off and implement different services? Is that the agreed upon strategy? And how does the security model hold up?
Sure.
Better or worse?
It's not one, right? So that's it. So we would say, what is that the business is trying to achieve? Because sometimes I'm willing to trade off a little bit of security risk because the speed is more critical to me. Yeah. Right. So in that scenario, potentially maybe you do just lift and shift, right? That's what we would call that, right? You just literally take it and there's a bunch of migration tools at this point for, most any application or payload. And so we'd have a migration path for you that would be fairly straightforward, right? And that would be, again, it's got to be a business choice, right? That risk has to be, I would say not only communicated, but acknowledged, right? By whether it's a VP of that particular business unit or the CEO or the staff, right? They have to do that. It can't just be like, well, we made this choice, CISO, and now you're stuck with it, right? I mean, there has to be some back and forth around that. So that's a simple one. And then if there's already development efforts, right? Again, if you're not starting from scratch, well, what's that development lifecycle look like? And are you guys, then I would start asking, frankly, more of that kind of question, right? Are you guys, secure CI/CD, DevOps, DevSecOps? It'll start an argument. But, we'll ask those questions, because if that's what drives your revenue, then we're going to, with the security architects and the operators and the analysts, we're going to look at, okay, we need to just do guardrails, right? And my really dumb analogy is my youngest child is 10, right? And she thinks she's a great bowler. And that's because we have auto rails today, which we didn't have when I was a kid, right? So she could just chuck that thing down there, and as long as it stays in those, now she has occasionally thrown it over into the other lane. That does happen. But 99% of the time she stays in those, right? So you can use that concept of that if let them move fast, but give them a trade-off of what's allowed. And as long as there's not, making up a number, 11 major security vulnerabilities, then let it fly. Right.
Yeah.
And then
but you answer my next question too, right? How do you get that CI/CD pipeline, that dev process, whether it's like my dev process is renaming files and pushing out the application manually, all the way to like, I have some CI/CD.
_1.
Yeah. I have some CI/CD pipeline. It's not using a lot of cloud technologies. I mean, maybe a lot of it is locally, but both of those, I guess what we're coming down to is it takes a long time to get that stuff in the cloud. Even if you're lifting and shifting, or, conceivably you could rewrite 80% of the application just to get it in the cloud. It's a long process. And what you're saying is, regardless of what path you choose, I think that was really prolific, Dutch, that you got to put guardrails up so that people can't screw it up and can't screw up security to make it like really bad, right?
Yeah, because if there's kind of 5 major business initiatives when we talk with customers that consistently come up, and 2 of those which feel like they're at odds. One is speed to market, right? And the other is customer experience. And sometimes those feel like they're at odds. And then how do I do that securely, right? And so that, like I said, I'll go back to my original, right? There's 3 types of risks, right? Do you have a risk management framework? How would the world end for you? Like, what would terrible look like, right? What do we need to do? Because what will often be the case is, and this could be frankly a smaller company or even a significantly sized company. And if DevOps is where they're at and they're driving that's an important part of their enterprise, then you can't slam on the brakes. Like that's where that is the business, right? And so sometimes it's frustrating for a security professional because you're like, oh my gosh, we can't take that. But it's not our risk to take, I would suggest, right? At scale, so public enterprise in the US, right? Boards do oversight. The business owns security risk like they own all risk, okay? And then it's our job to inform on risk, to push for acceptance of risk and put it where it lies, and then to manage it and to mitigate it. That's our role. And so that helps kind of, as we flesh that out, as we walk through this with customers too, of you don't own the risk. So don't be emotional about it. Like that you think it's a bad choice. It's frankly, I've had this discussion with PCI folks as well. It's frankly not your decision to make.
Right. And stuff is going to change, and you have to be comfortable with that, right? Because when you talk about from lift and shift, maybe to containers, maybe to cloud native services and functions, when you move from containers to a cloud native or function as a service, you basically like throw out most of what you've done for container security. But I think you have to be comfortable with that progression and that change, that your development processes and your security processes are just going to have to keep changing. And you're just going to be in this this endless loop of change.
Yeah, absolutely. And so sometimes it feels daunting for individuals, right? But on the flip side, it also means you have a lot more chances to get it correct. And we don't and if you frame it that way, right? If you frame it that way, that's a very different. I remember listening to Zane from Signal Sciences, right? Who's an early, DevSecOps guy. And he was talking about that. Hey, I came from somewhere where I used to do, 2 major, pushes a year to prod. And now we're doing 30 a day. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I had to go straight to the bar. Like, how do we do this? Right. And I happened to be working with Etsy at the time. And so I saw some of this and it was like mind blowing. I was at a different vendor, not in the cloud specifically. And I remember the questions they were asking about scale. I was in an NGFW and WAF companies at the time. I was like, what are you talking about? Like the scale it just didn't even make sense to me. I couldn't understand it. So I had to really dig in and understand DevOps a little bit better to realize what they were doing. But you get that many chances to get security right also. So if you reframe it that way, you can make small iterative mistakes and get to a much better place, frankly, faster than you probably did. And there's one advantage too for again, any cloud domain really, and that's you have APIs. And so I just want to throw that out so people think about that, right? If I have APIs, if everything's an API call, then things are knowable. Right, they are visible, and so I want to try to kind of point people to like there are some things that really are better for you if you think of it that way, right? So if you look at any risk management framework, the whole first section is about what assets, right? What do I have? Who has access, right? Basically, any of those, and if you build it correctly, that's actually much more provable and much easier to visualize and then log and then automate in a cloud environment because you have APIs. Everything's an API call, right? So the network path, to the compute, to the database, to the long-term store, it is a path that you can show. And so, and it's easy to log that, frankly. And so we have kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. We say, log everything, keep it forever, and argue with your CFO. Because you can keep all of that. And it's really valuable if you think about it that way.
There's also a tremendous amount of complexity that comes with that too. I often find that applications get very complex, and while, like you said, Dutch, there's a lot of opportunity to apply controls and have visibility. There's also a lot of complexity, and complexity means someone more than likely can get something wrong that an attacker's gonna go after. How do you kind of coach your clients?
I prefer to think of it, Paul, not so much as complexity, but a learning curve. Yes, it's complex until you kind of get in the groove. Because I agree with Dutch that you made a comment. You had a discussion with PCI people. I hope you guys had the discussion of it's not that the requirement doesn't apply anymore, whatever requirement you were discussing. It's how do you meet the requirement with the new way of doing things.
I guess complexity in this example, Jeff.
I agree with that.
I get your point. Like, you're going from a more monolithic application to a suite of microservices that all have to talk to each other, and also the underlying architecture is almost like another microservice. The file system, the network, the configuration, all of your services from your application are now broken up, and they're all communicating via API. Mm-hmm. What are the controls I need to put in place, and how do I monitor that? Is, in my opinion, more complex than I've got this monolithic application that had like a web server and an app server and a database. Right now, you've got 13 microservices that are providing all pieces of this application.
But you kind of have to do it once and get it right once, and then you're good, rather than figure out how to do it and then don't make any mistakes for the old-fashioned way of rolling out however many servers you need to roll out.
Agreed, Jeff. You spend more time planning and designing takes more time.
I completely agree. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, planning and designing takes more time, and if you get that right, Jeff, to your point, it will feel less complex and be less complex.
Yeah, because I would argue the complexity piece. It depends on when you were talking about, right? So I spent some time in software development environments, and when I was younger and I went through training, I remember thinking it can't be that bad. Like, as they were kind of saying how it was like taking a Swiss watch and smashing it with a hammer, and then it flies apart, and then the regression testing is basically picking up all the pieces, trying to figure out where they go, right, and who owns them. And I'm like, it can't be that bad. It was that bad. I mean, it's bad. It was 25 years. It was that bad, right? And so again, now you fast forward to, it's not because we've kind of defined sort of groupings, right, that are consistent taxonomy. We all know what we mean when we say that. But to Jeff's point, you're right. You have to get the architecting right on the front end. So you really have to think about forms, templates, that kind of an approach, and you need to get that, ideally try to get that right at the beginning, because then to justify you're right, because then you can just push it, right? You just automate it. And obviously you still have checks and the things that you do to make sure that access and resource and all the things are still commensurate with where they should be. But that's the key, right? So if I've got an API, things are visible, I can log those things, then I can automate those things, right? And so to make a change at scale when you have 100,000 customers or employees across multiple countries is way easier once you get that architecting, the templates, that stuff done. It's easy to iterate that then. Yeah, but you have to be thoughtful on the front end for sure.
So I should say, I do concede, Paul, that it is extremely complex to do it initially. But I have customers that rely on the fact that AWS is, and forgive me, I don't know your terminology. I would bastardize and say the image, the gold image, whatever the
right. Yeah, the AMI
thing is. You guys are keeping it up to date and current, and that's part of what you're offering. So responsibilities matrix, that's on you guys.
Yes.
My customer isn't patching anymore.
Right, that's correct. Yeah, and so you just take that off the plate. And again, it's more about then you get to shift the resources right now, right? Because you probably didn't get a degree or certification to do patching, like I didn't. Right. I don't. So I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but it's the same way. It's like maybe a dumb analogy, like when I went, in the space of. We had PBXs and telephony, and then Voice over IP came out, right? There was the same struggle, like, oh, but what does this mean? And I'm like, right, but it's at S7, but you got to get 3 and 4 really, you got to nail them, right? But once you do, super easy to deploy, right? But you really have to think about, well, who's my provider? Where's the handoff? So you do have to think about it, but this is not a new, like we've gone through iterations like that. So, but yeah, you have to stop and think about it and sort of look at your own biases as much as you can. And figure out, well, how do I make the most out of this? Yeah.
So,
Lee,
what? Yeah. So one of the things that I've been struggling with cloud migrations is that the customer really doesn't understand the data they're migrating and I'm in a very highly regulated space. Very compliance is a thing, and the type of data and its protections are paramount. So of course we're in the FedRAMP side of our cloud providers.
Sure. And
there's all these cool offerings that are available, but they haven't been FedRAMP certified, and our users want to use them right away. I'm just been, like I said, is that really only in the highly regulated spaces that people aren't aware of their data protection requirements and how the process that has to be behind using services?
No, I would suggest
it's slowing the hell out of us.
Oh, yeah, I would say no, it's not there. I would suggest, but they feel it first, right? In candor, right? Because there's a regulatory and compliance pressures to get that correct. But no, data, sensitive data classification, taxonomy, data lot. Those are all still enterprise questions that come up. But it is for sure the federal government, right? Financial services and healthcare, like those. If I was generalize, it's those 3 spaces that are really pushing on those offerings, to get those correct. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you did actually, and that's good. I know we can tell when we're getting a professional services person that hasn't dealt in government when they complain about the amount of acronyms. Acronyms make the federal government go round. If you learn them all, we'll make more.
Yeah, in my
the problem
time
is the federal government needs to go from point A to point B, not loop back to point A all the time.
Yeah.
In my day, right? So maybe Jeff or somebody else will agree, but like we used to have the SEI, right, which was your fill, your data encryption, if you will, right? And then we went to electronic versions of that, and then we changed the acronym to CEOI. And I'm like, is it the same thing? But it's the same thing, right? And I was really convinced that there was just. And I was an enlisted officer, so I'll pick on either one. So I just was convinced there's some major somewhere who had changed one letter, and that's how he got a ribbon. Like that was his whole thing for the year. So yeah, we just make up acronyms because it makes us feel super smart, and it also excludes people. Yep.
When I was working at a certain place in the manual crypto systems shop, which was producing the paper one-time pads,
yeah, okay.
the office next door to me, my sister branch, as it were, was responsible for the CEUIs.
There you go. Yep.
There you go. Although I think it meant something different back in those days, because I don't think you're older than me, but I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
So,
More questions?
The other question I had is, we talked a lot about lift and shift and versus really optimizing for cloud workload. Is that really happening, that people are going for a cloud optimal, or are people just locked into lift and shift because it worked over here like this and I can use the migration tool? I mean, I really would like to see them rebuild for cloud, but I'm just wondering, are people really doing it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would say in the last 3 years, it's accelerated towards that, right? So again, it's hard to make a real big generalization because it depends on the size of the entity and the complexity. But absolutely, even companies who are younger companies, and so maybe they're only 10 or 15 years old, and I would walk in and think, oh, they're probably already leaning towards the cloud in that way. But they had to start with something, right? But they're much more willing to say, hey, we're gonna optimize this, right? We're gonna refactor it. We're gonna rebuild it because we know that the speed is so critical. Getting that new app out is what drives the company. So yeah, they are absolutely doing that.
There's a ramp up time. It requires training though, Dutch, right?
Yeah. It does require training, and so each of the providers has like a mapping, of how to do that, right? In our case, we call it a Cloud Center of Excellence, right? There's a bunch of resources and trainings, if not all, most of which are free, right? Yeah, because we want to obviously enable you, right, to get it right from the get-go.
From a security person's view, like don't skip the training. And I know a lot of us hackers, like we like to be like, I'll just figure it. Like, don't skip the training because I really think that's how a lot of the issues with security present itself in the cloud. Like, there's not a lot of shortcuts. Right, we're talking about this scale in applications.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. Like our own CISO, recently, he was talking about again, kind of the fundamentals. And again, I wish it was something really esoteric. It's not. Like he calls it eat your veggies. Like you just have to do those things. Yeah. And like sometimes it resonates with people in a different way. Like I saw a thing where Peyton Manning was speaking, and I'm not necessarily Peyton Manning or Colts fan, but the one thing about his talk I thought was interesting. He talked about every summer going back to work with his college coach on his footwork. So he's 17, 18, 19 years in, and every summer he still went and did it. And so there's some really interesting research around. There's some fields where we don't do that. Like the music industry doesn't necessarily do that. For some odd reason, surgeons don't seem to do that. But sometimes we don't do that, right, in our space, to be blunt. And we should, right? If you do the fundamental things correctly, well over 95% of the things are either gone or really reduced.
But especially in AWS's case, Dutch, like the fundamentals change. And I mean, I think that's frustrating for a lot of us, but I also think it's a good thing in that the technology is constantly pushing forward. But if you're not paying attention, that documentation you read 3 months ago is likely out of date. And so I think it requires that constant retraining and focus on understanding it.
I would say that ultimately you're probably in a better state. So I'll be careful here, but I would say that there's a lot of places that they felt like they had good control because they could walk to their data center, or it was a colo and they thought they could go take a peek at it. If I was really being hardcore and doing an assessment, I'd say no, you weren't. And your dev cycle wasn't as good as you thought it was, right? You just didn't look at it that way because you felt like you owned it, like you could put your hands on it, right? So what to flip side, because I don't like to be kind of pessimistic, the flip side of it is the business has made a decision to make a change. Okay, the business did that, right? So you need to align your people to that change, and you say, how do we optimize this? How do we make the most out of it? You know what you do? You should go back and relook. Go look at your GRC policies, right? Go look at, do we still need to do this? Why are we having access? You should think about it as it's any kind of inflection point like that. You're going to make a change anyway. It's a chance for you to pause, and you should go look at your GRC. How do you approach things? We've been resistant to really coming together as a DevSecOps team. Guess what? This is your time. Like that, and I don't know what it is for each person. Each company entity is different, right? But I've seen lots of cases where they thought they were secure, and if I was, if I brought Jeff and some other people in, no, they weren't. So it's a chance to relook at things, and you should take that chance because you're making a change anyway.
I think there's one aspect you left out, and it's not a bad thing. I mean, but having somebody around like a Paul who has gone through and totally adopted and looked at all the technology and then really has run with the ball in terms of moving his stuff into the cloud and leveraging the new technology versus somebody who has no clue. I mean, just having guidance on how to do it right, a mentor, somebody you can call is huge. I mean, yes, there's the read the docs and learn or take training, but having somebody who's like kicking ass and taking names is a valuable component, whether it's the security side or the implementing it, going from legacy to containers, whatever. I think having a friend to call is huge.
I think having more
completely
people.
Agree. Yeah. And so plug for whatever your, associations or organizations are, right? So I agree because it cuts through to your point. Sometimes all the complexity and go, hey, I'm trying to do this. Like I just did that yesterday I pinged 3 CISOs. I'm like, hey, I'm reading this thing. How do you guys do it? And they boom, boom, boom. They gave me 3 answers, and I triangulated them. Okay, cool. I kind of thought, but you're right. You need the phone a friend, the Discord, the Slack channel, the association, CSA, I say whatever, whatever it is. But you're right. That it shortens that time to understanding significantly.
Yeah, we need more people that have done that stuff in the cloud too. I wish I had more people in my Rolodex, right, that know how to do it. I think that's slowly getting better as more people make this shift from on-prem to cloud.
Sure, it's a function of time, right?
Yeah.
You're right. I mean, Jeff kind of alluded to that, like when he first was touching cloud, something like 13, 14. Think about that, guys. I mean, it's less than a decade ago, right? I mean, that's not that long. So I had somebody ask me a couple of weeks ago, like, hey, I'll make up a number, who are the top 25 cloud CISOs, that you follow? And I'm like, I don't know if there are 25.
Yeah, maybe 10.
I mean, like 50, I was a friend, so I was joking, right?
No,
but I'm
I agree, though. Yeah,
I don't know if there's
at the risk of further dating
the other providers, but there's, it's still young, guys. It's less than 20 years, So it's
I was going to say at the risk of dating myself, everybody knows I'm old. I worked with a company back in 99, 2000 that I would call a cloud provider. So it's 20-ish years it's been around.
Yeah. So still soon, right? Right. And again, if you consider many companies, entities are only slightly dabbling in it. And again, we do cloud. Okay, cool. Like, what do you mean? Right? Because it can really be a swing, in terms of how complex and is it really central to their business? So yeah, it's still new, right? So there's no the compression algorithm for that is phone a friend.
Well, in internet years, it's not just new, but in the grand scheme of civilization, it's still pretty new.
Fair.
Even in the business process sense, it's pretty new.
Agreedly, yeah, you're right.
Yep.
These decision points that we're at in our journey of how do I update this application? Maybe I want to start going towards the cloud. And then as we have gone into great detail in this interview, right, there's a lot of decision points, and they're unique to almost not just every business, but every application, every problem you're trying to solve is a unique. I mean, you see this every day, Dutch, right? It's a unique conversation. It's different. Everything's different for every use case going to the cloud.
Well, some of the questions are the same, right? The questions are generally the same for me. Yeah, the outcome, the outputs of that question will then help them decide, okay, which is the A, B, or C path. They're all equally fine, but but so it's my job to kind of, I don't know, Gandalf them, which those paths, based on what I'm hearing, makes sense.
We started with those really big Lego bricks to put stuff together, and now we've just got the piece that has 10,000 pieces in it. We've got really small Lego pieces, so there's a lot more different ways to build it, right? And
security folks need to get comfortable with that. I'm like not being kind of aggressive, but I mean that is the case, right? So you have to be comfortable with being able to break things apart and put them back together. You can't just think about the era where there would be an argument about who controls the NGFW. right? Because it sits in the rack, right? And so a lot of times network ops folks, were air quotes controlling it, but then the security people are like, well, no, it should be my thing, right? Well, but also it was pretty static, right? I mean, let's be clear. I did a lot of those. Once we got the green blinky lights, networking people were fine, right? Latency, jitter, green lights, they're good, right? They didn't care. And then security people are like, well, no, we have to tune. They're like, no, don't do that.
Yeah.
If things are working, don't do it. And so we've come a long way, right? And why was it? Well, the risk reward was very different, right? The risk was really high. The reward seemed pretty low. But now when you think of the two-way doors, that changes that paradigm, right? Again, my risk is smaller and iterative. I can control my blast radius, whatever analogy you feel comfortable with, right? But it's different. You just cloud's not a tool or a set of tools. I would suggest like Agile and DevOps is a way of thinking about things, right? And you got to get that right.
Well, I think there's broader, more generic examples of the evolution. Yeah. I was thinking about this at some point in the last week or two. Security experts a few years ago, when Wi-Fi was new, would swear up and down, if you want to be secure, don't attach to the Wi-Fi. Well, it's ubiquitous now. When I was doing the early days of, PCI mid-2000s, I'm going into companies and they all had very strict rules about bringing in personal devices. It was more BlackBerries back then.
Sure.
But the idea of BYOD was, no, we're not going to allow it. And, that ship has sailed. I mean, these are more on a macro level. Yeah. But I think the cloud's much the same way. And I think what's new, to go back to our newness discussion from a moment ago, what's new is more the push to put infrastructure out in the cloud and that becoming more the norm. But I can remember just in the last few years, and there's probably still people who will say it today, don't do it, don't put it all in the cloud. I still myself don't like the idea of putting things in the cloud. I'm like, no, I want it to be solid and concrete, and I want to be able to see it, not this ethereal cloud stuff. So, I'm conceding, but with caution. And as we've discussed at length, it's complex because it's new, and like Wi-Fi. Early Wi-Fi, we all had a field day with it. It's more capable of being locked down and more secure these days, but it takes work, just like every other thing. And that's sort of, I think, the cycle that we're in now with the evolution of infrastructure in the cloud in particular.
Yeah, good observation. And I would comment. And then if there's a utility to the thing, right, a usefulness, people will just do it. Right. And so I've given this example, I'm sure we all have. I worked for a large company, was very strict. To your point, we had BlackBerries, but there was no BYOD, and we didn't have any Wi-Fi in my part of the corporate office. We had it at the executive briefing center and at the main corporate building, but I was in another campus, and I was collaborating a lot with engineers and architects, whatever, and it annoyed me that I didn't have network access in the conference room. So I drove to Best Buy or Fry's Electronics, depending on what part of the world you're in, right? But I drove to Best Buy and I plugged in and I literally ran it from under my desk into the conference room. And 30 something days later, somebody showed up and like, hey, do you have Wi-Fi?
Radio chat.
Yeah.
Moment of silence. Radio chat.
Yeah.
Hey, moment of silence.
They're like, hey, are you handing out Wi-Fi? And I said, maybe. Why? Why are you asking? But I could pick on them further, but it took them 30 something days. But my point was, it's not my phrase, it's somebody else's, but mistakes of effort, right? You have to remember that users, employees, customers even will make mistakes of effort. They're trying to do what they perceive
Dutch,
to be right.
You probably had a great password on your web encrypted access point.
Yeah, it was probably like 6 digits and my name _ my last initial or something really simple. This was it was like 1999. Yeah. But I use it because I could pick on myself, right? I thought, I thought it was important because I had a collaboration type style team that was at times project, and I'd be pulling people in and out. I'm like, I'm not dragging my dang laptop over to Susan's desk. Like, it just didn't make any sense to me, right? So I wasn't trying. By the way, I had no idea what I kind of sort of vaguely knew what the GRC policies were, but not in any detail. But I wasn't, because I was trying to go around them. I was trying to do my job. Right. And we have to, like, sometimes if it's appropriate, I have those discussions with folks who are, look, these are mistakes of effort. They're trying to do what they think is correct. And so either it's awareness, and I don't just mean like phishing and email. That's a thing that you should do that. But I mean, they don't understand the implications. And so they needed to have a human, kind of back to the earlier comment, a phone a friend. That's one of the things that I think that sometimes larger entities miss is you need to know where to go to talk to somebody. And it shouldn't be impersonal. Like, I should know that Jeff has a habitual relationship and I'm in the HR team, and I know I can Slack or Discord or call Jeff. Be like, hey man, I was about to do this. I was about to get Box. Can I get that? Or do I have to use Dropbox? Because if it's just a policy and it sits on a dusty shelf, it doesn't matter, right? It only matters then later when it gets checked. It doesn't matter to the user because it's not intrinsic to what you get. So we got to approach this differently. The resolution of these things is around human behavior, and it starts with humans. You got to go talk to the humans.
Dutch, well, I just have 5 questions for you. So I guess it's 6, because my first question is: are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
I thought it was 4.5.
I've got a 6th question if I can throw it in.
Throw in 6. Come on, let's
go for it.
That might be 7. All right. Go ahead, Jeff. One last question.
Oh, well, no. It was going to be one of the... I mean...
Oh, you're adding it on.
You're going to kick on to the end. All right. First question. In 5.3 questions with Security Weekly, 3 words to describe yourself.
Humorous. Interested and driven.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
My weapon of choice would be a old school sewing stick, and I would file it down and I would shove it up your nose and kill you silently.
Damn, you had that in the barrel.
That is disturbingly specific. If you wrote a book about
it's not like he thought about that one.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you got to remember, I was an infantry officer. Right?
There you go.
We'd sit around and ask these questions.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Dutch, a life revisited over whiskey.
What is your favorite hacker movie?
Oh man. I actually didn't really listen to these questions that closely before, so I don't know what my favorite hacker movie is. Just because I just think it is so iconic of the time frame. I mean, I love war games. I just love that whole concept, and they end up at Cheyenne Mountain Air Station. So I just like I have a soft spot. I made my kids all watch that. They thought it was nuts. So they're like, "What is that noise?" I'm like, "That's a modem." And I'm like, "Oh my god, they don't know what a modem is." Yeah. So I'll say war games. Yeah.
I told my son the other day, I'm like, like a VHS tape. He's like, Dad, what's a VHS tape? I'm like, oh, God.
I've had this experience, right? We were moving at one point, not that many years ago. And for some reason, I don't know why, I have a box full of music CDs. I'm not even sure what I'm doing with those anymore. But like my older kids were moving it. And the second oldest goes, hey, are these records? And I'm like, oh my god! Like and I kind of like I gave a +1 for like knowing that they were something
to do with music, right?
But he literally was stone cold serious. He's like, "Hey, Dad, are these records?" I'm like, "No, those are CDs." And I was about to jump in and explain that, and then the oldest child goes, "Oh, you mean like the old discs you use to program like a software program?" I'm like, "Oh my gosh!"
No, those are
+1. I'm glad that you kind of know that, but like, no.
Hold on, we haven't put away the whiteboard yet.
Yeah, right.
Dutch,
exactly.
Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional,
or otherwise.
Oh yeah, alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise. What's the otherwise category? Has anybody picked the otherwise?
It's a catch-all.
I try and get them on this.
But has anybody ever picked that?
Like alive or dead or fictional? I guess it would be non-fictional, but then because otherwise implies non-fictional, right? But like alive or dead implies non.
You're stalling.
I am stalling. I am absolutely stalling. So who would I pick? I would pick John Candy.
Oh,
that's a good one.
And because I think it would be hilarious, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Wow. Way to go.
best answer all year. Absolutely.
That might be the best answer since we've asked that question. Like,
Yeah,
Ever.
that was a good one. Dutch, thank you so much for appearing on
Wait,
Pulse.
wait, wait, wait.
Oh, wait. Hold on, we got a bonus question. Jeff has the bonus question.
Yeah.
Why do we call the cloud the cloud?
Why do we call the cloud the cloud? You know, I don't know that Boy, I remember reading the original NIST definition of the 5P, but I don't know that I know an exact answer to that. So I don't know. What do you have a good teed up answer for that?
I absolutely know the answer,
Let's hear
but I
it.
can also leave you hanging too.
Because nobody had a better idea.
No, in the early days of internet security, when we were running around trying to explain why companies needed firewalls if they were going to plug into the internet, we would have a network diagram, and the internet was always depicted as a cloud because it was. There's an official Visio, internet.
It's slightly smaller on the left side. Yeah.
And that's because it was unknown. You don't know what's in it. It's it's mysterious. It's where all the bad guys are. The cloud.
Much
Not your network. It's out there.
Yeah.
So it's Microsoft Visio's fault, I think, is the take-home point from that.
Thank
you, Visio.
I love it.
Well, Dutch, thank you so much for appearing on Pulse Security Weekly. It was great having you.
Thank you. I had a blast. It was great to I've watched you guys a bunch of times, so thrilled to be on. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Coming up next, the security news. Stay tuned. When it comes to web app and API security, the choice is simple. You can choose Fastly's security solution that teams will actually use in full blocking mode, just like 90% of their customers. Or you can stick with costly options that you probably just turn off. You can get Fastly's all-in-one platform that protects apps everywhere they live, however they're built. Or departments can agree to disagree. You can go to securityweekly.com/Fastly to learn more. Or you can just wish you had. Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Did you know we've got an entire network of shows here at Security Weekly? Application Security Weekly, Business Security Weekly, Security Compliance Weekly, Security Weekly News, and so much more. You can find all of our shows and subscribe to them on your favorite podcast catcher. On our YouTube channel, we're streaming on both YouTube Live and Twitch. We have our own Discord server, and to find all of that information, you can visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Go do that. We'd love to hang out with you. Actually, we've got 2 new series too. The CISO Stories podcast is out there, as well as our series with PlexTrack, which was awesome. We did red team, blue team, purple team, as well as a demo with PlexTrack. So check that out. Was there another announcement? Because I kind of read that one off the cuff. I wasn't using my teleprompter for that one. I wanted to give it a fresh take, so it's good. In other announcements, Joff, you're teaching a class as part of Black Hills Information Security, Wild West Hackin' Fest, and what is the other company that John, does he publicize that? What he calls it?
No, he doesn't really publicize that.
He doesn't really publicize it, but it's like under Anti-Siphon was his...
Yeah, Anti-Siphon, yeah. But Wild West Hackin' Fest is the public... side of what we're doing, hence the which shoulder they're over this shoulder. I've got actually 2 events coming up. One on May the 4th, which is a virtual event.
May the 4th
for my
be
class,
with you.
Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development, which is, let me tell you, just a fun class. I have such a great time doing this. It's a 16-hour class. We do a really, really nice format for everybody. It's 4 hours a day, so it's really digestible chunks. And I stand up the resources that the students use like several hours before, and they stay up and running several hours afterwards, so people have time to actually consume it and do a little bit of study before and after the class material. What we've got in the class is multiple different modules here. We talk about commodity C2 frameworks. We talk about threat modeling and attacker emulation. We talk about the anatomy of a C2 channel. I describe a custom C2 framework that I've written just for the class. We go into C# and .NET and building some client-side implants with a custom framework. We do some living off the land discussions, and then we jump pretty deeply into various shellcode delivery mechanisms. We work with C#, Python. We also deliver shellcode with Golang as well. We do some Golang and .NET sort of mashup stuff, and it's just a heck of a thing. You can probably see the reflection of my face as I'm reading through my checklist there. But we just have a whole lot of fun with it. I have a Git repo that goes along with it. Everybody gets access to the Git repo for a maximum of 6 months. There's deployment keys, and I even update some of the materials on an ongoing basis if there's been some minor updates along the way while you still have that access.
Awesome. Yep. And I know Tyler took the class and loved it, which is a resounding endorsement. Also, I was watching an interview with H.D. Moore, and H.D. Moore was like, I don't like Python. And he has his reasons, and he backs it up. And I respect that. And like, okay, it's not for everyone. I get it. But he's also like, he's like, I still developing a little bit in Ruby, but HD's like, I really love Golang. And he kind of described it like a lot of the stuff he's doing at Rumble is written in Golang. So I love that you're covering that in the course. And now your cost for a 2-day course, Joff, what is the cost of that?
So this is very, very affordable. It's $495 for the whole thing.
For a 2-day course. Oh, wow. So you're going $250 per day, essentially, right? For a 2-day class.
Yep, exactly. And that comes along with access to an Azure instance during the teaching period. I don't keep the Azure instance afterwards.
Running, yeah.
I can't afford to do
no,
that.
I got you. Yep.
But it also has a nice document there for how to build your own development instance with all the tools that we use and all that Git repo access.
Yeah, but I like that. I like that model, Job, because it's high quality training, and you're like at $250 to $500 a day for a student, right? Barring any discounts or other things programs that might be available. I think that's a really acceptable level, in my opinion, for training. I like the model.
Yeah, we got a lot of really great feedback the first run. I've also run it in a private context, and we got a lot of good feedback from that. So we got 2 runs coming up. One is May the 4th. The second run is actually a live event at Wild West Hackin' Fest Way West, which is an event in Reno, Nevada, right? On the week of June the 14th. And so the training goes right before the conference that week. And then the conference is like the Thursday and Friday. And
so I love the Wild West Hackin' Fest content, Joff. I mean, just for our audience out there, I was doing some research for a talk I actually gave this morning, and I found a talk by Deviant from 2017 Wild West Hackin' Fest on physical assessments and lockpicking, and I was like, wow.
That's amazing.
Dude, Deviant knocked it out of the park. And that's just an example of some of the content that John and team and the whole team at BHAS is putting together. Like, it was just an awesome talk, and I actually pulled parts of that I thought really represented the hacker spirit, and that's really what my talk was all about. And the part that I pulled out that I loved was there was what do they call it? A re-entry sensor. Like the door's locked on the outside, but if you're on the inside, when you approach the door, there's a heat and or motion sensor, right? They differ. A re-entry sensor, I think is what they call it, right? And they showed you can have a can of air, and if you point that can of air through the crack in the door, you can trigger it and the door opens from the outside. Or they showed Dave Kennedy with his vape device, right?
I remember that.
Right? Like, he blows the vape, and the vapes, the vapor actually triggers the re-entry sensor and opens the door from the outside. I was like, great hack, like hacking in its truest sense, right?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Anyway, I got a couple more quick things to say before we get to the news. One is, if you are interested in the live event at Wild West Hackin' Fest Way West, I'm going to run that as 2 solid days,
nice,
instead of over 4 days because of the conference format. Yep. So that'll be more like 6 to 8 hours a day instead of like 4 hours over 4 days, right? I've got 2 more announcements real quick. The other thing is, I have just put together a 1-day event. It's going to be a 4-hour mini class on regular expressions. I'm going to call this
nice.
I'm going to call this one Regular Expressions, Your New Lifestyle, or some title that's very similar to that. Right now, tentatively, I want you to watch the Wild West Hackin' Fest tweets and stuff, but tentatively, we are talking about May 25th right now for that event. That's a virtual event.
And what is that? What does that cost? Because I'm in.
So that one is going to be a range. We're going to say a minimum cost of $25 a head, up to $125. It's pay what you want in that range is what we're going to do for
and
that
now,
one.
do portions of that go to charity, or is that just a pay as you go kind of thing? I'm fine with either way, by the way.
Yeah, it's the same for all of these events. A portion of the proceeds of these events go to charity, and I have picked all along this year to invest in underrepresented demographics and information security, which is right now, and I always say it that way, but right now that is women that are underrepresented in information security, and we have a handful of different charities that do both young women, girls, and up and coming, sort of high schoolers in training.
Yeah, dude. For your RegX class, count me in as a student. I'm in.
Absolutely,
I'm all in. I mean, and I've spent a better part of my career in Unix and Linux. And just to put the PSA out there for Jobs class, like I'd still totally take a class in it. Totally.
Yeah,
like hands
and
down.
you're going to like the regex class. When we put that one out there, I've got a combination of Linux, Unix command line regex. I've got some Python regex in there.
Totally
I've got
dude.
I've got some VI in there. Just because you got to have some VI
right in
there.
my wheelhouse, dude. 100%. I'm student number 1. When that shit's released, like I am. Like Indiegogo, I'm backer number 1 in that class.
If you come in at $25, I'd love you to pay us more. Remember,
no, I'm gonna pay the $125. I want my money to go to you and to charity. I think that's great. No, I'm totally in. I'm in.
Oh,
yeah. So look for that one. So we'll get the stuff up on the show notes. I can give you the initial one, which is the bit.ly/JOFS JOFFS C2 class. That's for the Wild West Hackin' Fest virtual event.
Yeah, let us know when you have a link to the regex one, because like I said, I'm in, dude. I'm totally in on that.
And everybody got a teaser tonight on the regex one. That's something I've literally just finished, but I've been really excited about just doing an intro regex for multiple platforms for people, and this is it. So this one's coming.
If I may, if you have any challenges understanding regex, when you get Joff's class on it, you will freaking understand them like you didn't think you could.
Yes. Thank you, Lee. That's fantastic. Yeah.
Or you will be so thoroughly confused that you should probably find a new career.
No, I don't think so.
You know what? I'm going to go find the slide deck right now to double check the title I gave to it. Bear with me one sec, guys.
Well, we'll come back to you, Joff. You've had more than enough time.
Yeah, like regex and Joff. That's all you need to say, dude. Like I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah. Is it? I think
that's the title of the class. Regex and Joff.
I exactly. I'm in.
Yeah, we're gonna have a bunch of fun. Look, I looked up, just as an example, an obscure thing in grep. I bet you didn't know this. Grep can actually do Perl compatible regular expressions, and it can do look aheads and look behinds. And so you can do some amazing things with grep that most people would not realize.
Agreed.
So we're going to do some. I want
to move from like copying and pasting from Stack Overflow to being able to understand it enough to develop my own. And it sounds like that's what the class will help me accomplish.
Yeah, I'm calling it Regular Expressions, Your New Lifestyle.
Yeah.
That's what I'm going to call this one.
I'm in. Larry, on a somber note, you had something you wanted to discuss. We lost someone in the security community, which is always just such a difficult thing for myself and all of us here being involved, all of us being involved with the security community for quite some time, better part of 20 years at least. And when we lose people, it's hard, man. It's hard. Yeah. It's almost like we're losing one of our own family members, right? Like.
Yeah. Now, admittedly, this year and in the last couple of years, we've lost so many people to COVID, cancer, you name it, over the years. So, there's been so many, and we should probably do something like this more often to look back and give a quick remembrance for some of the folks as they happen. And so this is not a slight to any of those folks that we've lost in recent memory, but one that did happen last week was, as Jeff pointed out, Cyber Assassin, aka Chris Scott. Chris and I had a number of opportunities to hang out at some of the cons, and I specifically remember having a little bit of influence, although it wouldn't show it today, given COVID hair and beard and t-shirt. About the, how to be a gentleman hacker, and really about things you should consider when you dress, like how to fold a pocket square, and like wearing a hat and when to take your hat off, and grooming techniques, and just some of that like that old school type of things you should think about. But Chris was passionate about so many things, about dirt bikes and motocross and
fast cars,
fast cars, and quite honestly, I'd argue he died doing what he loved, and so we'll miss him. The community will be not the same without him, as will we for so many of the others that we've lost in the past couple of years.
Yeah, I don't recall knowing Chris like personally, but definitely seeing we shared communities online that we were both in. He had one of the faces at DEF CON from Eddie. And so instantly I'm like, I probably met Chris in passing a couple times, but like I felt like I knew him because we were in the same community. It just had so many different ties, right?
You know, Chris was so personable to folks. You probably more than met him in passing. You probably had some pretty good conversations and
right.
shared a
Like
cigar
he
with
was
him
probably
on
one dude that like stopped by the booth and like, you know, we exchanged like cool hacker stories and like pick up a Hack Naked sticker or a T-shirt or something, right? Or
more than likely, he sat down at the table with you guys outside of DerbyCon and had a cigar with you.
Yeah, exactly. He was there at the events, right?
Yeah. So, but yep, you know, one of those ones that you know, way too soon. You know, we'd gone through a bunch of stuff fairly recently, but always was trying to come out on top. So, yeah, he'll be missed.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing. We look back at some of our archives, and there's a picture of Chris, right? We hate to lose people in our community and people we knew in any capacity, people we've interviewed, and people that we've wanted to interview, right? Like I look back on some people we've interviewed have actually passed away, and I've made it a point to pay homage to those. Some people like Chris we knew from the community, we always pay homage to, right? And there's others that we never had the opportunity to talk to that have passed away, and it's a difficult thing. I think in any way that plays out, it's just a difficult thing. Looking into in my recent talk, losing anyone in our community or anyone that was labeled as a hacker in the good sense of the word, that I feel like we should have learned more from them. Had Chris on the show and others. I look back to the original MIT hackers. And some of the folks that I researched, and I'm like, oh, I really want to bring this person on for an interview. And I'm like, oh, like Wikipedia says they passed away because they were 80 something years old and they're no longer with us. And I'm like, man, it makes me want to be more aggressive in getting people on the show and interviewing people. So I think for me, like what I learned from this is if you've got people you want to see on the show and see us interview, like make sure you suggest them, like whether they're young or old or whatever the age is. I want to preserve their story as it relates to our community. I think it's super important.
Well, for me, it just makes me more painfully aware that I haven't seen anybody in over a year.
Agreed, Jeff. Agreed.
And when the world opens up again, we're talking off the air about when I can come to the studio again, when everybody's going to get their vaccinations. We're talking about unlocked. Mm-hmm. I personally, I think I'm not going to shoot for Vegas. I don't think I have to get permission from what I call Commander-in-Chief family, which is aka the wife.
I hear Black Hat's going to be Black Hat's going to be a hybrid event.
It's going to be hybrid, and I don't know if DEF CON's made their announcement yet, but just timing-wise, I'm gearing up for September GurCon. I'm going to take Nick Percoco up on his offer probably, and try to make it to ThoughtCon in October. But I just want to see people just give them stupid, awkward hugs, and it might be a little bit longer.
Ashley Schwartau, is that Wynn's daughter? That's Wynn's daughter, right? Yep. She did a documentary, I think it was 2008, 9-ish, in that time frame, called "Hackers Are People Too."
Yeah, I got it.
Love that title. It's a quick watch. And for the talk that I did, I did a talk today for Sci-Hub Armenia. It was interesting because of the pandemic. I was actually supposed to give this presentation a lot more in 2020, like at least 2 or 3 times, and it just didn't work out because of the pandemic. So I got to give it today for the first time, and it's about hackers and hacker history and hacker spirit and culture. And in preparation for that, last night I actually watched Hackers Are People Too. And not only did it give me insights into the hacker community, oh man, did it make me miss going to, like, I almost like don't watch it because it's gonna make you want to go to like the hacker conferences and hang out with your friends and embody that hacker spirit. And so that was really cool. It's a pretty cool, kind of dive into what hackers are really about, right? And you'll see people, look, if you're on the show and listen to the show, I guarantee you can see people talking about how cool it is to be in the hacker community, right? What it means to be a hacker. It's a good one. Yep. It's on Amazon Prime. I'm not sure if it's Prime, but it's on Amazon. Is one of the ways you can watch it. So go check it out.
All right.
On to the security news. Where do we want to start this evening? So many places to go. One story. What is one story we had most? Larry, your stories were pretty awesome this week, actually.
Well, and that's kind of funny because, like, oh man, it's so tough for stories this week.
Yeah, no,
and
like yours are really.
Apologies that I'm out of frame. Like, I have to move around my camera to see the browser tabs.
Yeah. Phil, let's talk about Facebook first.
Yeah, let's talk about it.
Get it over with.
Yeah. So what? Facebook leaked a bunch of phone numbers, like several million phone numbers. Like I'm trying to see if I can find it here.
553 million.
Yeah, I was going to say it was 500 plus.
Phone numbers, user accounts, emails, addresses. There's a lot in there.
The biggest one was the phone numbers.
Stuff that used to be in the phone book. So what's the big deal?
I agree, Jeff. Some people label this dump as kind of like lame, and I kind of agree. And I kind of I don't want to say I got in trouble on Discord, but like I'm in a lot of Discord channels, and like I don't pretend to remember like what all the rules are, and I apologize if I violated people's rules in their Discord channel. Like I kind of checked. I'm like, all right, cool. Like I'm not banned because like I apologize, but like someone was like, hey, where's this Facebook dump? And I'm like, hey, it's here. And some channels are like, nah, we don't allow that content. I'm like, dude, sorry. Like, I'll totally private message that. Like, I'll keep it out of the channel. Like, totally get that. But, like, at the same token, like, most of the people we know are like, this dump's kind of lame. Like, it's people's basically names and phone numbers. Jeff, to your point, that stuff you could have found in the phone book. You dial back to, late 80s, early 90s. This is stuff where hackers that had access to really like any commodity system in the phone system would be able to look up. Like that was a thing back in the day, and because I gave the presentation today, like that was a thing. They'd be like, oh well, if you're a good hacker, like you'll be able to call me, and like the phone would ring 15 minutes later at that person's house, right? Because they had access to the phone systems.
But then again, you think back to some of that stuff too, Paul. Is we had this concept of unlisted numbers, very much for law enforcement folks and just other people that were being harassed. And
and for millennials, that's opt out.
Exactly.
But like if hackers back in the day basically would break into phone system computers, get the phone numbers, dumpster dive for the passwords, and that gave them that power to be like, I can call you at your home, like that. Like I think that's still like a really cool kind of hacker skill, right? But not abusing that information either, right? Like they used that to kind of show that like they put the effort into being a really skilled hacker.
I'll say this though, Paul. I mean, that was more of an offhanded comment that it was phone numbers that used to be public knowledge. There was an article that dropped just a couple hours ago, and it's not in our news notes. And but I was reading it, and the headline caught me. It said Facebook isn't trying to notify any of the 530 some million, and they have no plans to do so. And one of the points that I thought was interesting, their contention is, well, we don't know exactly who it was, whatever. But what I thought was interesting was they're saying, and the information that's been compromised, it's not the type of information that you can go in and change. It's kind of static.
Yeah.
So which just does
but
give you
also not hard to get. Thought. Like. I mean, let's face it.
But
facts.
Also not hard to get.
You want to find someone's email or phone number? I mean, you don't have to be the greatest skilled hacker in the world to find that.
Correlation is one of the big missing pieces here that a lot of people kind of miss out or don't actually know how to use properly, is when you can actually associate a group or a Facebook account to a known email. That's one thing. That's a little bit difficult to do, right? You can't just do that from an API call. You can't do that from a public thing that's not listed. The second part of that is correlating other known burner numbers or other known cell phone numbers to existing personas and or Facebook accounts. Again, you're talking high profile people. A lot of these numbers are protected and unlisted, but it also correlates the ability for those numbers to then look at ad tracking data, geolocation, fencing, to correlate Facebook ID to a known phone number that may have been used in a different breach or a different data correlation point. So having that visibility, and not only that, with inside this breach, there are interest groups. It's not on all of them, but there are things that are associated with the account. Like if you liked Rolex watches, or you're part of a certain group. Some of that info got leaked, and they're still trying to figure out which database and correlation and how that is associated to the account.
So wait, they can use it to see which Facebook groups I'm in?
There are certain groups that were shown in those databases.
That could be bad.
Yep.
I'm in a lot of meme groups on Facebook.
Yeah.
Just
Paul,
putting
did I
it out
tell
there.
you?
When you
Paul,
look up my number on there, as most hackers, you should, because it's funny. I'm in a lot of meme groups. Just throwing that out there. Like heading it on right now.
Paul, speaking of those Facebook groups, did I tell you that I got kicked out of a flat earther group the other day?
No.
Yeah, I asked them that because of the COVID 6-foot distancing, if anybody's been pushed over the edge yet.
I knew there was a joke in there somewhere.
Yeah, so not really, but the story makes for better than a picture and a meme. But related to the story, I think the big deal is that you start to see the value, like from some of the things that Tyler mentioned, that there was enough value in it for Troy Hunt to put the phone numbers in Have I Been Pwned?
Yep.
To make them easily searchable. And he stated that there were definitely some challenges from a regex perspective. Joff, you could probably take a class.
Let's talk to Joff.
Right.
For being able to parse the data based on country code and all this type of stuff. And the interesting one that I find here is that I went and searched for the only two numbers that are associated with me that may have even remotely been tied to Facebook, and neither one of them show up. But it may be because I'm doing the search wrong.
I was going to say, I was trying the same thing. I was reading an article that did specify the syntax, and basically, if I've interpreted it correctly, you need to include the plus, country code, then the number, no dashes, no parentheses, just the string, but it's got to have the plus in front of it. Of course, I haven't found a number yet that was in there, but that seemed to be the article. I think it was one of the articles. It might have been the one I was reading that said, "Here's how you really find it."
Okay.
There's some unusual characters in there.
I thought I tried with the plus and you name it, and I didn't find anything. So maybe I should try again.
Yeah. I mean, it never hurts to consider using the optional quantifier in your regular expression.
I mean, but it also begs the privacy question of, like, why does Facebook ever need to know my phone number, right? Like, if they truly do have all their mechanisms to support multi-factor, which they do, they support YubiKey, they should never need to know my phone number, like, ever.
But
I
greater
get
majority of their
prompted
users do not have a YubiKey.
Yeah.
I get prompted by all sorts of apps all the time. Don't you want to add a phone number?
No,
don't
I
you
don't.
want to add a phone number?
I don't.
I'm like, no, I don't.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Jeff. It's I think LinkedIn keeps bugging you, right? Facebook's keep bugging me, and there's a lot of them. I'm like, no, sorry,
Twitter,
no, not even
Twitter,
sorry.
Twitter,
I'm not giving you a phone number.
I don't.
There's many that actually require it for sign up now. Like anything after 2017, if you didn't have an account on a lot of these platforms, it is a requirement. In fact, that's one of the ways that we have to build essentially VoIP and SIP trunk boxes to handle multiple SIMs to build up bots that then can
because I
make
hate that
accounts
thing
and
like
personas.
There's already a user account with your phone number. I'm like, that's me, but like I don't want to use my phone number as the identifier for me. I also don't want to use email because I want to remove the risk for email. And so it kind of begs the question of identity, right? Like, how do you prove your identity? And email and phone number shouldn't be associated with your identity. It really shouldn't, right? There should be some better ways to do that. Like, I'll give you my PGP key, maybe. I'll give you my Right. Two-factor authentication, YubiKey or whatever, there has to be better ways to validate like the identifying information that proves you are you. A phone number and email. Right. To me, the cell phone providers and the email providers don't do a good enough job at security for me to trust them enough to be like, yeah, no, that's me, right?
Well, that's what I was just about to get to, right? It's also the reason I don't like SMS as a second factor, right? Because you go with a cell phone provider, and you essentially are handing your security over to teenage employees at cell phone storefronts.
What could go wrong?
What could possibly go wrong with that?
But there's, great. Having looked into hacker history, one of the great tricks from the early phone phreakers there would be 15, 16, 17-year-old kids that would call up the phone company and be like, I'm up on a pole. Like, I need you to go, like, pass me through this trunk and give me the password so I can get into this. And the operators on the other end would believe that they legit were telephone workers up on a pole going like, I'm going to fall. Like, I'm at risk. Like, you need to, like, create that sense of urgency, pretend to be a worker that was up on a pole and social engineer the folks working at the phone system to give them information. It's the same thing with cell phone providers and even email.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
I would like to know, and it's not reliable. Sorry, Tyler.
No, you're good. I'd just like to know, like, a little bit more information from Facebook on where this database came from, what the vulnerability was. Was this simply someone scraping an open S3 bucket? Did they leave an API open? Was this a group database for a backup? Like, there's 100 ways that we've looked at hacking Facebook, and I'm curious, just based on the data that's in here and the format in which it's in with the data points that it has, it almost looks like some sort of vendor or sell-off of information at a very low level. So some information, I think, and some responsible disclosure to the public would be, within their best interest. But Facebook really doesn't care.
Agreed. Larry, your story number one. A Polish blogger sued after revealing a security issue in encrypted messenger. I find that interesting.
Apparently, you're the only one, Paul.
Oh,
before you go up,
sorry, I missed it. I had my headphones off. The oldest one was going to bed.
I had a final thought on Facebook though, before you move on. The article that I was reading that talked about them not notifying. There was some mention about I think they were talking about Ireland or something, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. Is Facebook subject to a GDPR violation times 533 million?
Yes.
So
a lot of the countries in the breach were outside the U.S.
Yep. Yeah. So, but do they get a buy because 2019?
Nope. I would say nope.
They might get a buy because they're Facebook, but
no,
that's gonna.
I don't think you're gonna buy for that.
But that's gonna hurt.
Yeah. Yep. That's going to hurt a lot.
Anyway, move on.
So, Larry, your story number one.
The Polish blogger sued after revealing security issue in encrypted messenger. Yeah. This strikes me out of something like out of the old days when somebody would go and post something on the internet about there's a flaw because I tried to reach out and
no response.
They never responded, and then they got sued. So this reminded me very much of this, that UseCrypt Messenger went and sued a bunch of one gentleman by the name of Tomas, that I will not attempt to pronounce his last name.
Zelinsky. There's like a
Zelinsky.
See, like no,
yeah.
Nope.
You're not. Moving on.
Yeah. And that he found that effectively what was happening is that the invite mechanism was going to a third party, and the third party there was some issues with the third party where you could start doing information gathering about who was being invited to the platform and all that type of stuff. So, yeah. And claimed that the blog, and Tomas was working with, quote, organized criminal groups.
Not cool.
Mhm.
Not cool. I think there's a hacker thing where we like to, I mean, for lack of a better term, like make the world a better place, right? And to have people think that it's a nefarious thing, I think is a disservice, right? We've seen that time and time again. Although I don't know how international laws work. I think in the U.S. we've made some good strides to say that we can break things and responsibly disclose that and not get sued here in the U.S. We've made better strides, certainly, but not sure how the laws work in Poland.
Yes, it's interesting that I think you're right, Paul. We've made a tremendous amount of progress in the States.
Right.
On
EFF being a huge proponent of that.
Yeah, they're a huge proponent.
Yeah.
Exactly. I think they've helped us along a lot, and I think the pen testing community has done a pretty good job in more recent history of acceptance of testing and and showing finally, we've been a little slow, showing real value to our efforts, which is super good because it means corporations will continue to want our services.
Yeah, like $200,000 awarded for a zero-click Zoom exploit in the Pwn2Own competition.
Oh, man.
Zoom came back and what I think is great about Zoom, in this case, they came back and was like, look, awesome that this happened. We love the feedback from the researchers. They put it in context that, like, there's certain, like, it has to be an in-session chat within Zoom meetings. Zoom webinars aren't impacted by the issue. And, like, I believe them because they started off with, like, we appreciate the researchers' efforts. So, like, whatever comes after that, I tend to believe more than a company that's like, we poo-poo the researcher, we're going to sue them into oblivion kind of thing. Zoom's like, no, researchers great.
Article,
like, we accept their observation and data and research about this issue, but here's kind of the ways, like, you could exploit it and could not exploit it. Here's what it affects, doesn't affect. And I thought it was an appropriate response.
Although that article could have gone either way. While we respect the researchers, we're going to sue them into oblivion.
Yeah, let's hope it doesn't turn out like that, right?
Yeah.
But Zoom was on the up and up. And they're like, no, this is cool. It's a flaw. We're going to fix it. It doesn't affect this, but it affects this, right? And that's cool.
And I think the platform in which it was disclosed and developed and so forth, it really stands a testament. So that was what Pwn2Own, run by Dragos.
Yeah.
Not the person, not the company.
Yeah, Dragos is good people. Yep.
And I got a chance to talk with him recently. It's super amazing. Super amazing, friendly, helpful guy.
He's awesome.
And has been doing this thing for years
long
with specific
time.
software as a target.
CanSecWest. I mean, Dragos founded CanSecWest. Yeah.
Yeah. And think about, we were going to go to CanSecWest so many years ago, but at the time for us as a new podcast,
getting there was hard.
Because we were paying out of pocket, it was ridiculously expensive.
To get to Vancouver, Vancouver, probably still to this day is pretty expensive. Yeah,
I mean, I think we were talking $3,000 or $4,000 each just to go to this conference.
To get there.
And have yet to go to this day.
Oh, when things open up,
we should go virtual.
But when things, I don't want to go virtual. I want to go there, right?
Yeah, Vancouver's one of those. I did that for that was my trip I did for my 50th birthday. I went to Vancouver. It was the best trip I ever had. Good choice. Yeah,
great place. Great place.
Yep. I did Vancouver for a SANS community class many years ago, and it was interesting. It was back in the day when I decided I'd try to save SANS money by taking the bus to my training class when I could have rented a car in a foreign country. And
what were you thinking?
I was young. I was naive. I was a community instructor. I've since learned my ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep. Is your dishwasher trying to kill you?
Yes.
Oh, most likely.
I mean,
yes, but why?
Like, killing you is a stretch, right? Like, but I don't want to discredit this
my
article.
Dishwasher?
I don't want to discredit,
Jeff,
but I don't want to. I don't want to discredit the article because the article was well written, which we don't
Oh, you
often
mean the
find.
machine? Okay.
Right, but basically the person now, and I identify with this article because I recently bought a new stove and a new dishwasher. My dishwasher in this case is not Wi-Fi connected, but my stove is. And what's kind of funny is like my wife
This sounds wrong, because if I was going to kill you, I'd kill you with the stove, not the dishwasher.
Right? Good point, Larry. Also, our wives are awesome. All of us on the hosts on the show, right? We have wives, and they try and sell us stuff on different things, right? And my wife was like, "Look, I want this stove." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And she's like, "It's got Wi-Fi," and I'm like, "Wait. Are you selling me on the fact that it has Wi-Fi because you're appealing to the nerd in me that wants to use the features in the stove that's Wi-Fi, or are you trying to sell me on the fact that it has Wi-Fi and I can hack it, or is it both?" And I'm like, whatever it comes down to, I think the right answer here is yes, dear. Like whatever it is, like yes, dear. Like all right. Like I'll try and use it for the features, and if it sucks or not, I'm still gonna try and hack it. I'm like, so the fact that it has Wi-Fi is a selling feature, like regardless, right? It's just a selling feature for us as hackers, right?
I had a similar conversation with our tax accountant
Yeah.
a couple of years ago, in that our refrigerator died. And we needed to go buy a new refrigerator, and we're there at Home
We want
Depot.
a smart one. We wanted the Samsung smart refrigerator with the tablet on the door.
The smart Samsung ones, and like they've got the Android tablet built
Yeah.
into it, and I'm like, this is connected. And I call the accountant right there at Home Depot, and I said, hey, if I buy this refrigerator and I publish some stuff on the internet about how I hacked it,
can I write it off?
and all
Yeah, I
this
wanna
type of
write it
stuff,
off. Yeah.
does it become a business expense because it was a research subject? He's like, no, it's a refrigerator. Like, no, you're not going to write off a goddamn $3,000 refrigerator.
So you either buy it anyway, or you get a new accountant. One of the two.
Oh no, but no, this accountant is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I like the
Otherwise, this
author's
accountant's really
comment
good.
where he says, why am I going to remotely turn on my dishwasher when I'm just standing next to it,
Exactly,
having put the
Lee.
last
Oh,
dish in it?
right.
It's like,
He was spot on. Again, it was a great article because he was very transparent in the fact that, like, all right, like I got this cool new dishwasher and I can like turn it off and turn it on from my phone, or like I'm standing right in front of it, like I can just push the button, and it's easier to just push the button than it is to fire up the app on my phone and do that. But the thing was, I thought was interesting is that in the dishwasher, what he was saying was basically when the cycle is done in the washing the dishes, it automatically opens the door. And the picture in the article is like someone laying under the dishwasher with the door open. Like if you happen to be standing there, like would it clock you or like destroy, like injure one of your pets or something if it was under the dishwasher? I have to imagine that similar to ICS, there are physical safeguards like your garage door, for example. When it closes, right, there's a sensor, both motion sensor, but also like if it senses some degree of resistance, your garage door is going to go back up. I'd imagine in the dishwasher it's a similar kind of thing. But
picture your kitchen. How often are people just hanging out
by the dishwasher,
laying on the floor?
Or how?
I mean, your pet, but your pet might be.
Don't most people run it overnight?
Yeah, but I mean, your pet might be. But again, there's probably physical sensors that like it's not going to have enough force where it's going to cause harm to a person or pet when your dishwasher opens.
Now, Paul, in your house, I would argue that it may cause some harm in that when the dishwasher, when you like to Jeff's point, when you run it at night and the dishwasher runs at 2 a.m. and the door starts opening, the dogs are going to freak out and start barking at 2 a.m.
Start barking and wake everyone up. Yeah, agreed. That's
Exactly.
totally
I just
a thing.
don't think. I think the internet does not need to touch all my things.
I agree.
That's all I'm going to say.
I agree, Joff. Like,
Never heard that about you, Jeff.
Physical, but like when you think about an attacker, like is it physical harm or is it monetary gain? And like a dishwasher might be a bad example. Like, is there monetary? Like, if
IoT
someone
botnet.
ransomwares my dishwasher Am
I'm
I
not
going to
gonna
pay the
give you your
ransom?
dishes until you pay me.
Right?
Botnet.
Can we
right?
move on to a more serious story?
I might pay the ransom. Like if I have to wash dishes by hand, Jeff, I might pay the ransom. Like quite
Or your wife,
honestly.
or your wife will.
You've got kids. That's what they're there for.
But kids are
but this
lazy. We
brings
know this.
this brings up two points. One, the first one, like, it's just easier to press the button. Do you know how many times I've loaded the dishwasher, put the tab in, closed it, and walked away and forgotten to start it, and be sitting down on the sofa in the living room with a beer and like, oh,
I got to get
go
up.
start the dishwasher. Yeah,
God
I
damn it.
got this. Like,
It's like your thermostat. I got to
Two.
get up and change the temperature.
yep.
God,
Two,
literally
how
first
many
world problems.
enterprises have a kitchenette with a dishwasher in it? And might be beneficial to have someone be able to start the dishwasher remotely as part of their job duties in that kitchenette, and
But
then
I'm
it
also
becomes a pivot point.
interested, like with my stove. Like, what's the smart features in my stove? Like, what? Why do I need my washer, my dryer, my stove, my dishwasher, or my microwave, or my coffee pot? Really, to have this capability?
Or
Like,
your
Turn
light
on your
bulbs.
dinner when you're at the office in case you prep it. Like,
I mean,
there's
my
a few
crock
cases
pot.
that my wife makes an argument
I mean,
for.
my
that I'm
crock
like,
pot,
"Yeah."
maybe like
That's why they invented
maybe I
the
set my
drive-thru
crock pot before
or
I
now
leave, and I want to be
DoorDash.
able to keep an eye on it. Like, I don't know.
Well, like
No, no,
Paul,
no.
think about how many times that you've gotten all the food ready and you put it on the stove, and you walk away, and you sit down on the sofa with a beer, and you forgot to turn the burner on.
Yeah, can it tell? Well, so
I can't even say that
now, but that's a good point. You could flip this
No,
the
it's
other
not.
way, but you could flip
It's a
this the
joke.
other way and go to safety, and have the appliances tell you like, hey, you left me on. Like, I turned my gas burner on. I moved the pan off of it when I was cooking breakfast for the family in the morning, and then I left and went to work, and I was like, oh shit, did I? I've literally like called my mother-in-law and been like, can you stop on my house? Because I don't know if I remember to turn the burner off on the stove, and that's a huge fire hazard if there's a gas burner on.
That's the only thing. You know, and
right. That's a safety thing.
That's been a worry of moms and wives ever since the electric stove was invented. Did I remember to turn the stove off? Or the iron?
Or the iron. Yep. And
I mean,
and
so
not just
yeah.
moms. I mean, Jeff. I mean, I know you're older, but not just moms and wives, but people in general. Like,
it's like
we-
Gary. You turned me on, and then you went to the backyard in the garden, and like,
any appliance. There is
Look
a safety
at Paul
issue.
going PC on me.
I went PC on like my wife gets up early because my wife gets up early and goes to work. Like, and I'm the one in charge, which is totally scary, right? I think there is a safety issue of appliances in the home, which may be the only use case to have them to be smart to help protect you. But if evil threat actors get into my stuff in the home, could they do stuff? I don't know. Anyway, I agree, Jeff. We should move on.
How about some malware on Android that'll attack your WhatsApp?
Let's do it.
So I actually thought that was kind of interesting. There's this new Android malware was in the Google Play Store called Flix Online. Which promised an unlimited entertainment Netflix account, free Premiere for 6. What it was an over-provisioned app that would then pick up all the notifications for WhatsApp, and it would dismiss them and send malware out to all the people who are messaging you on WhatsApp. What could possibly go wrong?
So Lee, this is an app that's not WhatsApp, but can delve into
It was called
the data
Flix
store
on-
on WhatsApp on your Android device.
Yeah. It
That
was
is
Curious
using
how
the
they're
overlay.
doing that via the app sandboxing.
It's using the overlay permissions and the what was the other one? There was a couple of permissions.
Interesting.
It's over and battery optimization.
Optimization.
Yes, so that your phone didn't shut down.
That one always gets them.
So it's a classic case of an app that somebody's installed that has tons and tons of permissions, and somebody's just said yes to all of it.
All of it, yeah.
Let's give it everything.
Yeah,
it
what could go wrong? I want my Netflix. Oh, and by the way, their Netflix sign-up screen was also a credential harvester. So
Yeah, so if anybody's done Android mobile application assessments, the broadcast listeners and the intent system is kind of interesting. And if you just without delving into it, just to say that granting additional access that is declared in the manifest that is not needed for an application is really, really, really dangerous, because there's lots of interesting things that can be done, especially when intents are triggering activities in other applications. So this crossover permission stuff can get really sticky depending on what apps are interacting with what other apps. And when you look at communication apps like WhatsApp and Signal and things like this, they often do have the ability to expose an intent interface to trigger certain actions, because that's how you get the share buttons on things, right? Where you can send data to them. So it can get really interesting in that area. Kind of fun to do analysis on those. I know Larry's done some. I've done some.
But what's interesting in the app kind of space, regardless of platform, Signal has added cryptocurrency support. I find this puzzling. Like, well, it's not the feature that I would want or expect from Signal.
Yeah, but why? Yeah, what was the impetus? What's the motivation?
My wish list for Signal is that it's not tied to my mobile number. Like, I want Signal.
Totally agree with that.
To be a communication platform that is independent of SMS and any kind of text messaging. Like, I don't want a phone.
What's the big deal? What's the big deal, Paul? You can look the phone number in the phone book.
Not just privacy in the number. I want private communications via Signal, because I trust Moxie and Signal in the protocol they've developed, but I want it independent of my mobile phone number. I want to be connected to the internet and communicate securely on Signal. I want to create groups within Signal that don't require that people have a phone number. I just want to secure private communications.
In the old days, we called that transmission security, Paul.
Yeah.
And the bane of transmission security, you want to know what the secret is? Endpoints.
Yeah.
Still applicable.
In that,
yes, it is.
Trusting. What do you mean by endpoints, Jeff?
Sooner or later, I mean, there's a place where you're putting the plain text in.
Yep.
And there's a place where you're getting the plain text out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's the endpoint.
You can intercept the encrypted communication all day, but it's a hell of a lot easier to just break into either of the.
Get it off the endpoint, baby. Yeah.
So I'm kind of puzzled as to how they're implementing cryptocurrency support. Like, is it a payment via Signal? I can send someone else a payment?
I mean, that's what the Wired article says. It's for doing person-to-person payments, kind of like a Venmo, only you're going to do it with cryptocurrency.
In cryptocurrency. Interesting.
Did they say which cryptos they're supporting?
They did.
Yes.
Bruce Schneier definitely poo-pooed this idea.
Mobile coin.
What is it, Lee?
Mobile coin.
Mobile coin is what the cryptocurrency they're using. Bruce says he thinks it's a incredibly bad idea, to quote the article. It's the bloating of what was a clean, secure communications app. I agree. It's a clean, secure communications app. However, again, tied to SMS, tied to having a mobile phone number, which is the feature that, again, I would like to see. But Bruce goes on to say it's the bloating. It's not just that blockchain. Bruce calls blockchain just plain stupid, which is interesting.
That's an interesting comment.
So Signal is choosing to tie itself specific to a blockchain currency. Adding cryptocurrency to an end-to-end encrypted app muddies the morality of the product and invites all sorts of government investigation and regulatory meddling.
I would agree with that.
Interesting.
I think because governments increasingly are going to step up against. These,
governments do not like. I mean, we touched on that with Nick Prococo last week, right? Governments do not like cryptocurrency because it basically threatens the currency that governments have created.
Oh, that's right. It directly goes against fiat currency in any country, and they like that control.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
So yeah, it almost sounds like somebody threw a little AI machine learning, leveraged some core competencies, mixed in a little bit of blockchain, and threw in some blockchain and cryptocurrency and shit on top. And
I don't
it's one
but
of
I don't
those-
know, Joe. I mean, Moxie's awesome. I love Moxie. And
Yeah, that's true.
I also love the fact that Signal is not a commercial entity in the strictest kind of definition of the term, right? Like they're
You know what's always disappointed me about Signal, though, is the same thing as you, is the fact that they mixed it up with phone technology. They got
Yeah.
involved in sort of taking over as your SMS app as well as your secure communication app, and I really do think that was a mistake. I wish they had chosen to, create some sort of unique identifier for your account that you could share privately, with
independent of
somebody.
your phone number. I mean, they don't store anything other than like your phone number either, which I think is admirable. But they also don't decouple, like allow you to decouple it from your phone. But I guess how else? I guess you could do that with a key, right? Like it doesn't matter if I have a phone number or I have a device that's connected to the internet. Whatever, I've got a key. The key is specific to me. I share the public key with everyone I want to communicate with, and that's cool, right? Like
I think we
Moxie
need to
talked
throw
about.
some-
I mean, Moxie went on Joe Rogan and talked about like he wanted to make it independent of the SMS system, and I wanted to see that feature before they added stuff like cryptocurrency stuff to it, I guess.
Well, I mean, part of me was wondering are they trying to look into how they could leverage blockchain, which has some interesting advantages, but cryptocurrency feels like a step too far.
I guess I don't want to use my secure messaging app to pay for stuff. Like I look at those as two different things. I want to communicate securely, and I want to be able to pay people for stuff securely, and I want those to be two separate things. Like communications and payment to me are two separate things. In my mind.
But wait,
I
it
mean,
does
but
more-
maybe in Signal's mind, those go hand in hand.
But why?
Yeah.
Because we could.
I don't want anything that can tie me back to my secure communications to tie me to another form of identity. That just sounds like payment seems like
I
an
don't know.
identity
We're
I want
speculating a
separate.
bunch.
But I mean, cryptocurrency doesn't necessarily imply identity, though.
No,
Think about
but-
it, right?
I mean,
Like,
I think
a lot of
Unless
systems.
you're washing your wallets, I don't know. Like it's pretty easy to tie most of those.
yeah, I think Lee was kind of hinting at maybe they wanted to get a taste of a blockchain technology, and and maybe they want to do that for non-repudiation reasons in the communication. But this would be a funny way to go about it by introducing a cryptocurrency.
Totally agree.
And Tyler, maybe that's your problem. Maybe you washed that USB thumb drive.
Oh, shit.
Did it go through the wash? Have you? Is it like a sock you can't find the match for? Like, have
Maybe it's in the sock.
you checked the lint trap in your?
You gotta do that every
it's
time you drag clothes.
It's
don't you?
with the half sock pairs, Tyler. All those
It
missing
is
socks.
where your other socks have gone, right? Which is this abyss.
Oh,
Oh
Yeah,
man,
we're gonna have to. It's getting late, so yeah,
Wherever
let's
that
move on.
other
you want
sock
to call
is,
up Discord?
that's
Or do we
where
want-
Tyler's
Yeah, we
gonna
need to talk
find
about
his,
Discord. We saw some increased fraudulent account hacking attempts. How would you describe those? On our own Discord
bots,
server.
bots
Yeah,
and
bots.
spam.
Like I woke up yesterday morning, the other night, and I was like, oh my god, all these people are messaging me like on the Security Weekly Discord, like there's bad shit going down, and I'm like, oh, that's bad. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. And then I saw the story that Cisco Talos team had identified threat actors going after Discord and Slack servers. Kind of interesting. Not a coincidence, I think.
Although, admittedly, one of our users, posted publicly in some of the channels that one of the bots that joined our Discord server, the names were pretty obvious that were dictionary-based words, and one of them had reached out to them and were trying to do Bitcoin scamming.
Yeah.
So, like, not something that I would see that trying to blow up with malware, but maybe. I mean, maybe
Yeah.
the Bitcoin scamming was actually malware. Obviously, we didn't dig into it that much, but yeah.
Also, they're using
over the last couple days.
Discord as a covert channel. It sounds like as well, or C2 Communications is what it
Sure.
kind of felt like as well.
I was going to say,
to
like, the first one I don't know so much about, but I can see using Discord as a C2 because it's pretty popular nowadays.
Yep.
Yeah.
We've been doing that for years, right? Slack, Discord,
It's
any kind of SaaS.
like any kind of communication channel that it becomes popular. Attackers abuse that for C2 communications, for social engineering, for all that stuff. Interesting how the timing was weird. Like I saw in our own Discord channel, the bots that kind of got through that were able to message people to do social engineering to get them to click on a link. Also, Talos was like, well, not only doing that, but also they're using that for other things. Like all of it it was a weird coincidence, like that all the stuff went down at the same time.
And on that note,
moving on to the next story. TV hacking. This one was kind of a...
And then? There is no and then!
And then there isn't and then. If you want to root your WebOS LG TV, stuff is going to come out, apparently. It's a story I found. I don't know what it is, but like basically, right, there's O-Day that is yet to be released.
Yep. So, last one, I think, Paul, but 0 day in the ability for, what is the feature set? The ThinQ login. So basically, if you can get your TV to browse to a URL, there's a vulnerability in the browser to do a 0 day exploit to get code execution and get root access. And in fact, it will enable dev mode so you can get Telnet on your LG TV. And
does it also add other accounts while it's doing that?
Well, that's a great question, Tyler.
Remains to be seen.
They do have the script available that does the enabling and that type of stuff. So like it's open to a point, I guess, and it's coming soon. But it is specifically within the ThinQ application, which you have to go through some gyrations to get to a point where you can load a specific URL. Like, let's see. You have to go to the Google Play Store link, and click on this, and then go here and click on Help. It very much reminds me of the old school kiosk breakouts that we'd have to do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
last story: Ubiquiti sent a statement to Krebs, and you can read the statement on the Krebs blog. But basically, what Brian was saying was, Ubiquiti's statement confirms what Krebs had reported. They're not disputing the facts that were raised in his previous piece. However, it may seem that Ubiquiti is squabbling over whether the data was in fact stolen. However, Krebs' source, aka Adam, said Ubiquiti can say there's no evidence that customer information was accessed because Ubiquiti failed to keep the logs of who was accessing the database. Kind of like a lot to unpack there in terms of like, oh, there was a breach, but like, what did they get? Oh, but they didn't get customer data, but we weren't logging access to customer data. So basically a bunch of he said, she said. In terms of the story.
And that's reasonable with some of the potentially corporate policies. Like your corporate policy can say, we don't log data access to customer data for more than 24 hours, and then you delete it.
As long as you follow that.
As long as you follow it, then that's all good. So, yeah.
I hope that's the case.
Change your password and enable MFA is really what it comes down to, right?
Hopefully they've got a good breach and IR response team happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
Define good.
Yeah.
Depends on your perspective.
We'll leave that one alone. Not one of the top 3. How about that?
Yeah.
Any other stories you want to cover quickly?
No.
Wow.
I got nothing.
Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching to this edition of Paul Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out.